across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and good morning to you wherever you are and whatever you are doing. I'm going to be with you for the next 3 hours to talk you through the news, give you some views, try and get rid of some of those blues perhaps, because it is of course the Easter weekend, the most holy, the most important, the most wonderful weekend in the calendar. So I am honoured and privileged to be sharing it with you. Now, by the way, during the course of the show, if you'd like to join the conversation, have a chit-chat with me, send me a WhatsApp message, leave me a voice note, or indeed send me a text message. These are the details that you need to be mindful of. If it's to make a call, you can call at any time and let us know your name and your number, the sort of things you might want to talk about, and we will give you a call back. That's right. You don't get customer service like that very often these days, do you? It's also your normal network rate. The number is 0344 499 1000. Now, if you'd like to send a WhatsApp message because you are connected to Tinternet, then you can also use that number. And WhatsApp gives you the wonderful feature of being able to record a voice note as well. So if you don't fancy talking to me in person, but you still want to hear your mellifluous tones resonate on the national airwaves, then you can also send that to 0344499 1000. If you'd rather send a good old-fashioned text message, it's 87222. But if you are going to do that, well, you have to write the word talk, capital letters TALK, before you type your message. That way it knows which studio it should be routed to here in Murdoch Towers. Now, as you might be aware, the King is not going to be delivering an Easter message, which I find rather sad, to be honest, because, as I said, it's probably the most important day in the calendar for many people in this country, those people who call themselves Christians. I consider myself among them. And so I thought, well, what would I like to say to you over Easter? And I was thinking about this when I was on the train coming down, and the real message behind Easter, both for Christians and for non-Christians. And I think the message is something a bit like this. Christianity isn't a battle between good and evil. Christianity is really the battle between love and fear. And nothing resembles this more, signifies this more, than the story of Easter. The Christian God is a humble God. He's not a dictator. He doesn't intervene and run our lives. He gives us the freedoms to live how we choose to live. We have entirely free will. And yet we are also imperfect. And the Christian God knows this. And what he did at Easter was remarkable. He sent his one and only Son, God in human form, to be humbled, humiliated, crucified in the full glare of the public, punished for crimes he did not commit. Why would he do that? Well, he did it because he loves this world and he loves his children. And he wanted to show us that while we are imperfect and we are going to sin, we can be saved. He did it to show all of us that through despair, there is hope. Through suffering and strife, there's a brighter tomorrow. I think about what Jesus must have gone through when he sat in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before his crucifixion, knowing what was coming. How scared he may have been, knowing the anguish, the pain, the misery, the torture he was going to face the following day. The betrayal of someone that he called friend, who handed him over to the authorities. And yet this is a story that we know has a happy outcome. The rebirth, the resurrection, the miracle of defeating the grave. And so we are told that underneath this despair, we must find faith. We must find hope, even when it comes to death. Of course, Christians believe that there is life after death. And it separates us from the material world which is cursed by decay, the material world which has a shelf life. We know that instead we can lean into the spiritual world and try and grow closer to our Creator, and in doing so become ever more godly. We're told to trust, to build that relationship with God. And we look today over this Easter weekend as Artemis 2 has now been unshackled from the Earth's orbit, heading towards the moon. And we look at human progress, and we can reflect on human progress throughout the ages. And what do we see? Well, we see that Christendom has brought so much of it, whether we're talking about the steam engine, the discovery of gravity, vaccines, electricity, the internet, the World Wide Web. Out of Christendom has brought so much progress that has brought humans ever closer to God. Yet at the same time, Christians around the world face persecution, are being driven out of their homelands, belittlement, mockery. Even in this country, a once great Christian nation, it often feels as though the church, which has given us so much, is under attack. And yet the message is love, not fear. Fear is the way that evil gets inside us, steers us down the wrong path. Think about how fear dictates your life, dictates human actions. FOMO, fear of missing out. In relationships, fear of infidelity through distrust, or perhaps fear of commitment. Replace that fear with love, with faith, and with hope. That, to me, is the real message of Easter. John chapter 3, verses 16 to 17. For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. This is the real, incredible twist at the end of the story of Christianity. A God that loves us, who knows that we're imperfect, but loves us unconditionally and tells us to not be afraid, because after the darkness, he guarantees us a brighter day. Okay, right, shall we get on now with the news? We're joined by the brilliant James Price, a wonderful friend of mine. Good morning and Good Friday to you, James.
Alex, I've got to say that was one of the most beautiful pieces of radio I think I can ever remember listening to. It's the perfect day to do it, and I think we should hold it in mind when we talk about all these things that we talk about, because it's not unrelated. The world is not unrelated from what you've talked about, nor is it even unrelated from the way that everybody listening and watching, regardless of whether or not they believe themselves to be practicing confessional Christians or not, the way that we will look and talk about every story is reflected through all of this, because our civilization is built on those ideas you've said, and I'm really grateful that you've aired all this morning.
Well, I may not be the king, but I try and do my bit. Let's talk about some of the godlessness of the United Kingdom, so to speak. We have the story today of the boss of M&S, who's been condemning Sadiq Khan, condemning as well the government, Sir Keir Starmer, of some of the ridiculous scenes that we've seen taking place in Clapham, where we had a bunch of feral youths all invading shops on the high street, looting it, causing mayhem, lawless teenagers who actually do not live in fear, but also don't seem to have any respect or any love for the world around them. And he's turned around and said, we cannot go on in a country where there is no punishment for people who do not want to live by the mores and laws of our society. It's impacting on staff, it's impacting on profit margins, it's impacting on social cohesion. And we have become, sadly, a country incredibly soft on crime.
Yeah, absolutely right. And there's nothing kind about being soft on crime, on the criminals or any of the victims. Adam Smith once said that mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. But I'd go one further and say that it was also cruelty to the guilty, that if you don't teach people right and wrong, we know what happens. And today's Good Friday, last night, meaning therefore, was Maundy Thursday, the night of the Last Supper. Christ gives everybody that new commandment to love one another as I have loved you. Well, it doesn't seem like any of these people are loving anybody else the way they're going around pushing people about, terrifying people, causing all these horrible scenes and the rest of it. But we also I don't think we've been loving these kids in the right way, either parents, many of whom seem to be totally absent from the scene, or society in general, because we've got this very softly approach now that thinks that you can't be mean to anybody and that discipline is somehow cruel. Well, every parent knows the opposite is exactly true, and what these kids need is some proper discipline. And if the parents and the community won't provide it, even I, as a small government person, say that it needs to be the state that provides it.
Well, this is it. And, it is fear of standing up for to these people, or for these people, quite frankly, and among them their need to get involved, the fear of missing out, to want to be included, to run with the pack rather than stand up for what is the right thing to do. It seems to me, moving onwards, that perhaps Ed Miliband is going to stand up for what I believe is the right thing to do. He may have once thought that the right thing to do was concreting over our oil wells, talking about reopening our oil wells being an act of climate vandalism. Well, he's not going to do that when it comes to Rosebank, which is quite frankly what we need, considering we rely on imports for 80% of our jet fuel. But he is thinking about enabling the Jackdaw gas field, 150 miles off Aberdeen, to begin supplying gas to more than 1 million homes. Ironically, I'd say that the better one would be to get the oil out, economically speaking. But, perhaps a little Easter miracle of a glimmer of common sense beginning to shine forth out of the cabinet.
I won't try and extend the Christian imagery all the way through every answer, but, Luke does say there's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents. And maybe Ed Miliband is on the verge of realising that he needs to repent, because he has been totally bonkers, totally economically illiterate through all of this now. And it seems like economic reality is finally lumbered up to his department and slapped him in the face, because this is exactly what we need. And you'll hear some people, mostly people on the left, and Ed Miliband himself, saying, oh, no, turning on North Sea oil and gas won't make any difference. It won't make any difference at all because gas and oil is sold on an international market price. It's all complete nonsense, right? If that were true, what would be the case if all of Saudi Arabia and all of Qatar and all of the UAE stopped selling all of theirs because oil and gas was sold on an international rate? Obviously, the price would go up, because that's what people are fearing now with the Strait of Hormuz being closed. So on simple laws of supply and demand, which I wouldn't expect a Marxist like Ed Miliband to understand, admittedly, or easily, all this stuff falls down. Of course, if you have more oil and gas being created and produced, the cost comes down because there's more of it around, and that's basically the tenets of how capitalism works and why everything around us works and is so wonderful. And in a world in which we could be producing this in Britain, why would we be not doing that rather than going and buying it more economically unfriendly and unviable from somewhere else, enriching them rather than ourselves? Only a Labour politician could fail to understand this.
Oh, indeed. But also people seem to fail to understand the importance of oil. I mean, yes, a good move that we might be trying to get some of our gas out. We're going to need it. I think that's patently obvious. But people seem to fail to understand that oil isn't, we're not sitting there just putting petrol into cars and that's it. Oil makes so many important things. I slather myself in oil every morning because I'm an eczema sufferer. I cover myself in petroleum. But it goes into making medicines, plastics, almost everything. I'm sitting in the studio looking around me, and from my mobile phone to the computer to the mouse mat, it's all made in no small part with the help of oil. And he calls the idea of reopening Rosebank an act of climate vandalism. Well, I think pouring concrete in those oil wells in the first place was a massive act of economic vandalism. But let us hope that indeed Ed Miliband might rethink that one as well. We've now got Tim Davie, the outgoing Director General of the BBC, whose final act seemed to be to bin Scott Mills from Radio 2. He was answering questions of members of staff and said that the staff culture of the broadcaster will never be fully fixed. but he does talk about it's changing in quite a dramatic way. And what he's talking about here is not so much the bias that the BBC is condemned to be riddled with for futurity, one thinks, until they start having more working class people getting jobs there. But the culture of cover-up, the culture of almost beatifying the talents. They can get away with everything. Nobody standing up and saying, this needs to be dealt with. Again, fear. And it's almost as if it's interesting, it's almost a very Easter message that the culture will never be fixed because, unfortunately, humanity itself will never be fixed.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice way to put it. I mean, you've got to feel for this guy being a bit demob happy on his last day, running a big journalistic entity and giving such a great headline for all of us by saying the quiet part out loud. The culture at the BBC will never be fixed. I mean, dear me, that's such a headline, isn't it? But he's probably right if past experience is anything to go by. Not only this Scott Mills character, who I must admit, I'm such a fuddy-duddy young fogey that I'd never heard of him before this week. But it turns out that he's a wrong un to join the rogues gallery of Hugh Edwards and Jimmy Savile and some of the most awful people society has ever produced. And then yet this organisation got away with it for so long, aided and abetted by the fact that if you want to watch live television in this country, you still have to fund that organisation, whether or not you watch it on pain of prosecution, which is a totally mad, bonkers system. And I wish the Conservative Party had gone ahead with changing the model of the BBC. I wouldn't have totally privatised it, by the way. I would have just massively defunded it and forced it to do a lot of didactic stuff, a lot of, what's the most elitist thing I can think of? Opera and ballet and stuff like that, so that people might actually get some access to it and go, oh, actually, this stuff is nice. Turns out Western civilization is capable of producing more than Dick and Dom in the Bungalow and Can Fat Teens Hunt.
I love Dick and Dom in the Bungalow. They at one point, I don't know if they still do, had a breakfast show over on Virgin. I used to chat with them in the corridors. Nice guys. But, it's interesting. You and I have a similar vision for what we'd do to the BBC. Massively defund it. And I would say democratise it. No taxation without representation. They should be answerable to us as to what we want in their schedule and get rid of at least 50% of their output because they don't need it. They don't need all those channels and stations. Let's talk about Sir Keir Starmer, who is planning Brexit betrayal on the 10th anniversary of our historic vote to leave the EU. Now, we know, in part, what this is going to look like. Sneaking back into the single market, but not fully joining it. Paying to follow their rules, which to me seems utterly crazy and no doubt would have a huge impact on the trade deals we've managed to do now as an independent nation with other countries. But equally, the two things that frighten me more than this, one is getting involved in a defence pact, which we've basically already done, signed most of the paperwork for that already, when it is clear, looking at the European response to helping reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to getting out of the starting blocks quickly to go and help defend Ukraine, they cannot run anything defensively. They've not been paying their way into NATO. No wonder Trump is fed up with the entire organisation. Europe is shameful. And secondly, this idea of the youth mobility scheme, where my understanding is the governments have said, well, we'll be part of it, but we need a cap. And the EU are going, cap? What cap? We all know what it means if people under the age of 30 can travel freely to the United Kingdom. Well, that 500,000 who Pedro Sanchez in Spain decided to say you've got a right to remain here, Lord knows who they are, where they've come from, what they intend to do, could suddenly turn around and go, as much fun as Spain is, I've got some mates over in the United Kingdom. My understanding is if I make my way over there, I can work in the black market, I can involve myself in petty crime or indeed organised cartels. Perhaps if I get myself over there and then claim asylum, I'll get a hotel room, a mobile phone and Lord knows what. I mean, these are crazy, crazy plans, but it seems clear to me that he is hell-bent on getting us back into the Brussels orbit.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, I couldn't actually put it any better myself, Alex. That was bang on at every point along the way. And just go and look at those scenes in Spain. It's worth just repeating what you said there. That the Spanish Prime Minister, Mad Commie, has said that there'll be now a pathway to citizenship for 500,000, is it, people who broken into the country illegally, which means that if you go on holiday to France or the Netherlands or Denmark or Sweden in a few years' time, You could see those people perfectly legally travelling up from Madrid up to wherever you may be. And if we were back in the EU, they'd be coming here as well. But even putting aside the arguments around whether we should rejoin the EU because of the trade barriers or because it's mean and nasty to be Brexit or whatever, the kind of spurious arguments the left have got left on this, it doesn't solve the problem of today, which is leading to some of this stuff, which is a massive problem that we've already discussed about energy, and another massive problem with the fact that Europe is not capable right now of sufficiently defending itself. Energy policy in bits of the EU is almost as bonkers or as bonkers as it is here. Look at the Germans, for God's sake. They did elect some Greens into bits of government and they got rid of all the nuclear power plants. And that's been such a success. They're opening up coal power plants again and coal power plants springing up across Europe. So that's bonkers when the Americans, who we seem to be thumbing our noses to as part of this deal, have got huge amounts of cheap energy that they can sell to us at a decent market rate. And that's not before we even start talking about defence. The fact that after many decades, we're still reliant on the taxpayers of Indiana and Ohio to pay for the defence of our very rich and decadent continent is totally bonkers. And it doesn't seem to me that any of the principals in France or Germany or Italy or Spain are doing anything about that. God bless the Poles for holding up their end and for being enough of a threat at the moment to keep Vladimir Putin from knocking at any of our doors.
Isn't it a strange thing when you look at the soundest countries in Europe making very sensible decisions? They tend to be the most Christian ones, tying back into the theme of which we started this programme. James, thank you ever so much for joining me on your Easter weekend. Righto, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, I'm going to be giving you a travel update because I'd imagine you might be one of the millions who is planning to go somewhere, go see relatives, enjoy the extra time off and share in the spirit of the holiday with those that you love. We'll be giving you an update on what's going on the roads and on the railways after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Well, apparently the Easter weekend is going to be the busiest on the road since 2022. There are almost 21 million trips planned. Now, this is because apparently fewer of us may be thinking of going abroad given all the disruption around the world and the cost of flights, etc. So we may be staying in the UK, meaning more than 1 million extra trips planned compared to last year. In fact, 12.5 million Brits are planning an overnight trip over Easter. Let's speak now to Lisa Mino, travel editor of The Sun, to find out what is going on the roads, what is going on the railways. Let's start with the railways, Lisa, because my understanding is they're actually going to be incredibly quiet. When I got on my train from the Cotswolds early on today, I was basically the only person on it, which was quite nice. It was luxurious, I'm not going to lie. But there are also going to be significant disruptions because given it's a quiet period, that is often the time that Network Rail decide they're going to get on with doing some repairs. What's going to be affected?
Well, that's right. Yes, it is. There's going to be over 270 various different engineering projects going on over the bank holiday weekend. The one that's really, I think, the main one that is going to affect the most number of people is the West Coast Main Line. Huge amounts of work on there, which means there'll be no trains out of Euston until as far as Milton Keynes. So everything will stop in Milton Keynes, and then you'll either have to get onto a Thameslink train at Bedford with buses to take you between the two. Any trip that you're going to take this weekend, though, I think it's a good idea to check in advance. And as you said, although lots of us are actually going to be out there on the roads, we're not going as far as we used to. And that's really something that's quite significant, obviously, because of the rise in fuel prices. More than half of us are only planning to make a journey between 50 and 100 miles. So we're choosing to travel for shorter distances, but we still want to get away.
Talk to me about the rising cost of petrol, because people are sort of gingerly looking at the petrol station forecourts, looking at the costs creeping up. Diesel's already 30% up. How bad is it? Are things going to stabilise? Should people be filling up their tanks? Should we panic buy, or should we be mindful about whether we travel or not, or should we just try and get on with life as per normal?
I think somebody of my advanced age, I just think basically get on with life as normal. But I think we are going to have to look at the fact that, increases of 30% in diesel, 16% in petrol, that is going to have a significant impact, not just on people's leisure time, but also those of us who are working, people having to work. It is going to start to have an impact if this goes on much longer. The price of oil is going to be an issue, and we're seeing that already in flights, with Michael O'Leary saying that he looks like, he says he's looking like to have to cancel flights in May and June if the actual conflict and the crisis continues much longer.
And in terms of busyness, congestion on the roads over Easter weekend, are there going to be particular hotspots that people should be mindful of if they are planning to make a longer journey?
Oh, it's all of those, the favourites. So, of course, the M25 car park, basically on the left-hand side, is always going to be busy. But then you've got the M4 and the M5 at Bristol. That's particularly busy at the moment. The A303 in Wiltshire past Stonehenge, that's always a bit of a spot that everybody goes to. And the M4 in South Wales. But, of course, with Storm Dave as well, I think there could be significant disruption in the north and Scotland as well because of those incredibly high winds they're predicting overnight from Saturday to Sunday.
Well, there you go, folks. Lisa, thank you ever so much for your comprehensive travel advice, and whatever you're doing, wherever you are going, you can stay tuned to Talk, can't you? We'll keep you company if you find yourself in a bit of a jam. Don't let that stop you from going and seeing your loved ones. How very important that is. Let's do some messages and then take a call. Anonymous has sent a message saying, being a serving police officer, I can say that social society has broken down, not just within the police, but right across the judicial system. Indeed, it has. I mean, you can see that everywhere. And I sort of look to this idea that perhaps we've been a bit too hasty in the West to remove God from the equation, and then into that vacuum you find all sorts of unanticipated horrible things tend to pour. My word, fair play, Alex. A tremendous message of hope. 100% you won't hear this anywhere on mainstream TV on this great day. Saying we're not mainstream, we like to say legacy, in terms of those of us who work in the growth sectors of the broadcasting industry compared to, let's say, the more historic parts which are losing audiences. Thank you, Alex, for your beautiful speech. My husband starts chemotherapy next week, and I really needed a boost, says Linda in Walmer. Those of us who are Christians, let's pray for Linda and Linda's husband as he starts chemotherapy next week, and keep them in our thoughts. Thank you so much for your message, Linda. I'll be thinking of you. And the Queen gave Easter messages not yearly, but in times of trouble, like 2 years of the pandemic, and she'd definitely stand tall and offer us hope in these times of war and attack on the UK for many fronts. I think it's so important as a nation we maintain these traditions, and I hate the way now that Easter's been so diminished, that it's all about Christmas, and now we have to call it Happy Holidays, and it's become a material thing, hasn't it? All about presents. Easter's been reduced to chocolate bunnies. Have you noticed they've even started calling Easter holidays now, rather than Easter? And like I was saying, the problem is with the material world, it's all threatened by death and decay. It all has a shelf life. The spiritual world, far more important. Let's speak now to Daniel, who is in Epsom. Good morning, Daniel.
Hey, love, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you? Well, I'm not very well. I've actually got a bit of a cold. If I hadn't zapped my sinuses with Sudafed, I'd be sounding like Ed Miliband this morning. But other than that, I'm grateful to be here.
Do you know what? I thought you had a bit of a cold when I was listening earlier. Well, I hope you feel better later on. I used to be a royalist, Alex. I used to be a really big royalist. But yeah. I think under King Charles, why do I get the feeling that he's part of the WEF globalist kind of, you know, he couldn't care less about native British people in their own country. I don't know. He's putting me off being a royalist, to be honest. And I've written to King Charles and Prince William. And I've said to them, look, I know you're not supposed to get into sort of internal politics, but if you don't get involved in the immigration debate in the UK, your son George or your grandson George will be ruling over a third world hellhole toilet, you know. And the first thing that, if they ever take control of the UK, the first thing they do is get rid of the royal family, you know. So it's kind of misplaced loyalty from the royal family, from King Charles. This kind of like globalist thing he's going on about. It's like the first thing they'll do is get rid of all of our heritage and traditions, including the royal family. So.
I mean, it's interesting. We don't know, of course, what happens in the weekly audience that the King has with the Prime Minister. We don't know the sort of things he might be saying to Sir Keir Starmer. That's never disclosed. And there's going to be the state visit to America. And let's see if he can help heal the fracturing special relationship. But I think there needs to be a better PR job done around the King. I think he's got a great many merits. He's a fantastic artist. His paintings are beautiful, which I always think is a bit of a window into his soul. I love the way he patches his clothes. You can look at pictures of shoes he's had, Barber jackets, smoking jackets, covered in patches where he likes to recycle things. The fact that he's got a car that essentially runs off recycled old waste products from red wine. There's a beautiful kindness and an eccentricity to our King that I wish was further elevated, and I don't know how things work among courtiers and advice to the royals of whether they should do messages or not, what they should say, what the public persona should be portraying, because one imagines that there are a great many people who have a hand in those decisions. But what we will never see as the general public is the things that are said behind closed doors. And my understanding, he is actually a man of great faith. So let us hope that as our Prime Minister leads our country, the King might be giving him occasional weekly words of wisdom. We can but hope. Daniel, thank you ever so much for calling. OK, we are now going to take a break, but when we come back, we're joined by the excellent Tom Sharp-Obi, former Royal Navy commander, who I think is one of the best of the best at looking at what is going on in Iran and looking into the crystal ball and trying to predict what happens next. That's coming up just after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Now, what next in Iran? Kelly Badenoch seems to be the latest to wade into the chorus of people condemning President Trump for not having a plan, and yet, I was reading a report in the papers of somebody who was saying, well, look, for over 30 years, any planning for a war with Iran involved the expectation they would close the Strait of Hormuz, as if this wasn't factored in. And in the same report, this military official was saying how perfect so far the military strategy has been. That every single bomb seems to have dropped on target, that Iran is hugely militarily weakened, that its navy is all but defunct at this point, that it hasn't got surface-to-air missile launchers, and it certainly cannot make a nuclear weapon anytime soon. So perhaps we should be chalking all of these things up as victories. And Donald Trump, of course, knows that in America, well, they're doing drill, baby, drill. They can survive the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, the person who's going to be suffering the most, perhaps, could end up being President Xi Jinping. And yet Iran is looking at the Strait of Hormuz and essentially turning it into a way of gangster style, extracting as much money as possible with a pay-to-pass, almost a toll booth for its friends only. And so what has Donald Trump done? He said, listen, Europe, you need that opened. Go on, do it yourself. Join us, help us. Are we? Well, doesn't seem that way. Let's speak now to Tom Sharp-Oby, former Royal Navy commander. Now, those of us who love a bit of geopolitics and study strategies geopolitically know that actually, when it comes to the most treasured and precious things on Earth, it is the maritime routes. Those who control the seas control so much of the world's economy. We saw this, of course, when Russia invaded Ukraine. We're seeing it again now. And us, the United Kingdom, once a brilliant naval nation, well, we seem to be completely out of the game. What do you think is going to go on next? Will Europe potentially go and help reopen the Strait of Hormuz? Is Donald Trump, do you think, going to launch some sort of military offensive over the course of the Easter weekend, starting, some people anticipate, tomorrow?
Well, firstly, I do wish we did appreciate the sea more in this country and across Europe, but particularly here. As you say, historically, it's an absolute no-brainer, but it's also very clear that we've neglected it. The idea that the whole, as an island nation, we depend on exactly what's happening now, not happening, has been lost on us. And we need to regain that very quickly, or as quickly as these things can be done. In terms of what happens next in the Gulf, we discussed winning and losing, and that came up in a few clips before I came on. And that's not always a helpful language here, because militarily you can say that America and Israel are winning this, right? They're hitting, as you say, they're striking the targets they're aiming at. They're degrading capability X, Y, and Z, and it all looks good on a spreadsheet. But if you break it down in terms of who's achieving their strategic end states right now, then it's clearly Iran. They've got control of the Strait. They've had it since pretty much the 2nd of March, almost from the off. They got control of the Straits, and as you also said, that was a no-brainer that they were going to do this. That came as a surprise to no one who studied this plan. So they've got control. They've ensured regime survivals of a kind, but it's still the same type of regime, and that's important. And they have a massive voice in the global economy and have the world's interest. So they're achieving their end states. We need to break that status quo, and that's where it becomes very difficult to predict what next.
I was reading that, Saturday morning, it's been the time that Trump has sort of started his various offensives when it comes to operations in the Middle East, and that despite what he is saying about Europe is, well, you go and get your oil if you need it so much, that the likelihood is he is probably going to send Marines, special forces into the Strait of Hormuz to try and start capturing some of those coastal areas where Iran is storing up weapons to attack any ships that try and pass through who they consider not to be an ally of Iran. How messy could that be as an operation? Because as we were discussing so far, there's been limited amount of mess, limited amount of fallout so far in terms of the way that this war is being prosecuted by the Americans and the Israelis. But this is where, in terms of warfare, things could start getting a little bit sketchier, a little bit more dangerous, that the body count might start going up.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, the rhetoric out of the White House sort of fluctuates from get your own oil, we don't need NATO anymore, you didn't come to our help, to amassing a small to medium-sized land invasion force on board USS Tripoli, and the USS Boxer is coming to join in the middle of this month. So these two things sit at completely odds. It's very Trumpian, isn't it, to kind of keep people guessing, and sometimes that rhetoric becomes disingenuous and very hard to listen to. But if you focus on what might happen next with the amphibiosity, I think that opens a whole different sort of dimension to this. First and foremost, of which it's an invasion. You can dress it up however you like, special forces, Ranger Ops, whatever you call it. This is the US invading someone else's country. And I think that's going to prove very interesting, certainly in polling terms in the US, whether or not that's acceptable, and particularly if casualties, start to roll in. And if you look at something like Karg Island, up in the northern Persian Gulf, I think taking that almost certainly would result in large scale casualties. So yeah, there's a lot more sort of toing and froing to go before this actually starts kicking off, I think.
I mean, what choices does he have? Because it seems to me if he just turns around and says, that's it, done, we're walking away now, like you said, the regime in Iran could chalk it up as a victory, and it actually hands them a sort of mafioso-style control of the Strait of Hormuz, which will line their pockets to the tune of billions. That doesn't seem to be an option. Trying to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, well, doing nothing. The opposite of that is doing something. So one assumes he is going to have to go down that route. But the other element is whether there can be any sort of negotiation, which to me seems for the birds. If America does go into the Strait of Hormuz, and my belief is that they will do that and try and retake it from the Iranians, do you think that is possible? Will that be a success story, or is this really going to be the time that Trump is trumped?
I think you can take those islands. You can take certain key islands in the choke point itself. So forget Karg, that's 400 nautical miles away. But you could take small islands in the strait. The problem I have with that, and actually historically that would be useful, and perhaps returning the ownership of those after this is all over to the UAE is an interesting angle here. But militarily, it suggests that there's a front line here, that you can take and capture land, and it gives you control over that area. And that's where I have my doubts, because these missiles and drones can come from 50, 100, 200 miles inland in the mountains. So you're not going to attrit, sorry to use that horrible military word, but you're not going to write that threat down to zero by taking those islands. You'll give yourself an element of control, some situational awareness, you'll attract a lot of enemy fire, but you're not stopping the thing that is stopping the ships. And besides, of course, even if you can write that down to nearly zero, you then have to convince the merchant vessels that it's nearly zero. So there's a second part of this that's the most important bit in many ways when we talk about the military effect. That is just to lend itself to making it safe. So look, I think the small islands are a viable option. I think, and this is huge speculation here, but if you wanted to take Karg, and Karg would offer the US significant strategic levers. If you wanted to take Karg, then taking those islands, some of those islands first, would be a good psychological warm-up. I mean, sorry to use that, make it sound like this is gameplay, but in reality, get people in America used to the idea of boots on the ground, and do it in an environment that's a little bit safer. And never mind if it doesn't necessarily achieve any significant military end state, it then acclimatizes you to the big one. That's hugely speculative. I don't know if that's the way this is going, but it's an option.
Something tells me, Tom, that things are going to liven up somewhat over the course of the weekend. Tom Sharp, OB, former Royal Navy Commander, thank you so much for joining us. Certainly, it's been busy in the skies over my house. I live just downwind of Fairford. A beautiful clear day yesterday, and I kept hearing these loud, ripping noises, as if someone was tearing the fabric of heaven itself. And I'd look up in the sky and there would be the beautiful silhouette of B-1 bombers streaking across the azure. Right, OK, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we're going to be finding out about perhaps why the King didn't give an Easter message. We're also going to be looking ahead at the state visits to America. The fact that someone scribbled "Not Our King" in graffiti on a cathedral on Maundy Thursday, really sad. But also the fact that King Charles allegedly warned Sir Keir Starmer against appointing Peter Mandelson. How do we know that? Well, we're going to be catching up with the brilliant Talk royal correspondent Rupert Bell just after this.
Welcome to Down the Local, the show that goes from pub to pub across the country, speaking to the punters about the subjects driving us all nuts at the moment.
That's Rachel Reeves, Rachel Thieves, Rachel McCounts.
I don't really know Meghan Markle. I know Meghan Markle's from Suits, that's about it.
I don't know about anyone else, and I don't know where this is going. I have 0% beard, and I feel
raising the flag, I think, is symptomatic of its desperation.
Is public transport good value for money?
No, it isn't.
You really don't like speaking to people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and welcome back to the show. And welcome, Rupert Bell, Talk's royal correspondent. Happy Easter, Rupert. Why has the King decided not to deliver an Easter message?
It's not something he does every year. So presumably he feels it's not relevant. He went to Maundy Thursday. He made a statement surrounding that. So it's not something, unlike the Christmas, where we have the traditional Christmas message. It's not something. So I think it's probably a personal choice. Now, whether people might say, should he have done one? I don't know. But it is something that is not cast in stone. So I don't think we need to read too much into it. There's quite a lot going on, and, you know, maybe a soothing word from the King might have gone down well, but I don't know. But ultimately, yesterday was an important service for him, going to Wales, something it rarely has happened in the 800 years of this celebration, which the late Queen, took on the road. It used to always be in London, but she, during her time, visited every cathedral in the land, certainly in England. There was only 2 visits to Wales in the 800-year history, and that second one was yesterday. So it was a symbolic occasion and an important one for the Maundy Thursday ceremony, where they hand out basically something to 77 men and women, reflecting the age of the king.
Tell me about the Not Our King graffiti.
Well, yes, we've seen this at various things, sort of protests. That on one of the walls, someone had the graffiti of "Not Our King." There was a small protest, and everyone's entitled to protest, and there was one. They did try and cover up the "Not Our King" and get rid of it, but it seemed that it was a pretty good paint job. It was difficult to get rid of, so they covered it up. But it does reflect that particularly in North Wales, remember back in the day, there was certainly in the early 70s, late 60s, there was a strong independent movement, and also it got quite heated at times, particularly in North Wales. So there's always been an element of republicanism in North Wales. So not a total surprise to see something like that happening yesterday.
And then it's been revealed in the Daily Mail that apparently King Charles warned Keir Starmer against appointing Peter Mandelson as the US ambassador. How have we come to learn this? How can we know such a thing happened?
Well, this is the reports. Now, it's all allegedly. Now, basically, the Labour, there's been statements saying that this was not the case. But, there was a letter published that drawing attention that this was an unusual appointment usually tends not to be a political appointment, the US ambassadorial role, which clearly this was, because there was a great deal of politicking at play. But allegedly, the king is said is almost suggesting, is this really a good idea, is what is allegedly the king has said to Keir Starmer. Now, remember, the king and the Prime Minister have a weekly discussion. So it clearly might have come up in conversations that they would have at their meeting once a week. And the Queen was always renowned for having a sort of gentle word in her Prime Minister's ear, as if she thought something was perhaps not quite right. And maybe the king has done something similar. And hindsight is proving that if the king did say that, then, and it is revealed that he genuinely did say that, then that may further question Keir Starmer's judgment surrounding this appointment of Peter Mandelson, which has obviously led to him being in particular hot water at present.
Now, we know that coming up towards the end of this month is a state visit of the King and the Queen over to America. And Donald Trump has been saying, oh, he's a great man. He supports me when it comes to Iran. Perhaps he'll go back and tell Sir Keir Starmer he ought to do the same. But it is against royal protocol for us to know the political leanings of the monarch or to the sort of views he might hold. But given that you are our royal correspondent and an observer of these things, do you have any sort of inkling where the king might stand when it comes to Donald Trump?
Well, I think probably he does his country's bidding. And look, he has had a state visit with him, so he's presumably spent quite a lot of time with him. And unusual for political leaders, the king is usually always seen in a good light with Donald Trump, unlike French counterparts. And so you see that the issue is that the king, when he's on these state visits, is doing his government's bidding. And the king was fully aware that he's representing this country in a soft power way. Now, in 2 or 3 weeks' time, at the end of April, when this is due to take place, the political landscape is an ever-changing one. What's going on in Iran, evolving all the time, and President Trump sort of fires off fusillades at all sorts of people, every political leader out there to do his bidding. So it's going to be a very difficult trip for the king to navigate. At the heart of it, it is supposed to be the celebrations of 250 years of American independence from Britain. So that is the reason for the state visit. But you can bet your bottom dollar there will be a lot of politicking going on behind the scenes as they try and keep the special relationship on course. And that's the power of the monarchy. And without that, our relationship may be even rockier with America, given President Trump has always been very positive to not only the late Queen, the King, Prince William as well, with his views on them. And So it's very interesting, and obviously there will be. He loves, being sort of feted. Does President Trump? He loves travelling in a gold coach, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of gold on show as President Trump tries to match. If you just go to Mar-a-Lago to find out all the gold that they've got down there, so it will be an ego. Moment for President Trump lovely to have the king there, and it's all the showbiz element of it. But actually, at the heart of it, there's a lot going to be going on behind the scenes. Will Keir Starmer go? I don't know. But Yvette Cooper you would expect her to be in attendance.
You would indeed. Listen, thank you ever so much, Rupert, for joining us on the programme, giving us an update. I wonder as well whether the King might get to see his grandchildren, because, of course, the reason given by Harry and Meghan for not coming over to the United Kingdom, particularly with their children, is that of safety. Well, we can't have armed guards in the UK. That shouldn't necessarily preclude them going to see the King when they're in America. So it'd be interesting to see what comes to pass when it comes to that royal visit, both politically, in terms of the pageantry, but also perhaps in terms of some of those personal relationships as well. Right, now, we're going to take a short break, go and put the kettle on. There is so much more to talk about, and we're going to be digging deeper into what's going on in America just after this. See you in a moment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Right, shall we do some calls and some messages? Because I want to hear from you guys today. Easter and all that. Let's have a proper little get-together, shall we? Michael says, thank you for your lovely words this morning, Alex. Oh, my pleasure. I'm going to Old Buckingham Air Show on the Sunday, and I wish I could treat you to a ticket and take you along. It's a great day. Michael in Norwich. I wish I could come with you as well. I do love me a good air show. In fact, when I was getting on the Bakerloo line this morning, I noticed there are huge adverts in the station for Riot, the Royal International Air Tattoo, which is due to take place at Fairford between 17th and the 19th. I've already got my tickets for the Sunday. I cannot wait to go. I'm just wondering whether or not it's going to be cancelled if this war is still going on. Plus, as much as I like going to an air show, I don't really need one at the moment. I can just step outside my front door and have a look in the sky. My friends and I went to Fairford for a few drinks in the local pubs on Wednesday, and they are chocker full of American airmen. No, that wasn't the reason why I went. Of course it was. Morning, Alex. I just want to say how much I enjoyed your beautiful Easter introduction to the show today, says Brad in Cambridge. My pleasure. I like pointing people in the direction of some vitamin G. We all need it from time to time. Dear Alex, I wouldn't consider myself religious at all. However, I'm respectful of all religions and beliefs. Great start to the show. Important message, not only for those that believe, but those of us that don't as well, says Mike. Well, this is exactly what I think. The Easter message is so fascinating. It makes us so unique when it comes to the way that Christianity is formulated compared to other religions. In what other religion do you have such a humble God who loves us so much that he himself comes down to be tortured, to be degraded, to become a laughing stock, to be punished simply because we are the imperfect ones? I think it's a beautiful message, and like I said, the big message of the Bible is the difference between fear and love. Alex, wow, pork scratching, scrumpy rugby and a beautiful sermon. Perfecto. Next you'll be into Nordic noir novels. I can't say I've ever read a Nordic noir novel, but I do like reading, so maybe I should give it a go. Hi, Alex, regarding shoplifting by hordes of unruly kids. When I was a youngster in the 70s, I was taught respect by my parents. If I let them down, I got a slap on the leg. In my teenage years, girls would steal makeup from the Woolworths and urge me to do it too. It was knowing the consequences of a slap on the leg and the shame it would put on my parents that made me do the right thing and not participate. You see, this is the thing. When we have love and respect for our neighbours, if we were all to adopt a little bit of the Christian posture throughout life, hey, there wouldn't be any problems in the world, would there? That is why we have agency. We live in freedom. Our God is not a tyrant or a dictator. He says, I trust you to go and make the right decision. And even though a lot of the time you're not going to, I'm going to love you unconditionally, regardless. In the hope that in the same way that we don't want to bring pain to our parents who adore us, that should be the thing that drives us in life, to want to love one another. And of course, as James Price was saying earlier, the message at the Last Supper before the morning of Christ's crucifixion was to go and love one another as I love you all. Morning, Alex. I just want to say how much I enjoyed your beautiful Easter introduction to the show today. Well, good. I'm glad so many of you have enjoyed it. Go to church. It's lovely there as well. You don't have to, of course. I would happily advise it. I can't wait to go to church. Easter Sunday is my favourite day of the entire church calendar. It is amazing. Right, OK, should we do some calls? Let's speak to Mark in Lincolnshire. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Alex. Dear me. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
As a fellow Christian, it was just more about the King's lack of a message, really. I think a little bit of context as well, really. The Queen she only ever did one actual specific Easter message. And that was in 2020. So I think on that side of it, I don't think it's any need for people to get themselves their knickers in a knot, shall we say.
Yeah.
I think if there's any offence to be had here, it's that just very, very recently he was quite happy doing a Ramadan message. They all were. The entire establishment was. I think that's where I have an issue with this. Because if you're going to do one for one, then you should be doing them for all at the end of the day. If he considers himself, as he likes to think of himself, as defender of the faith, which is nonsense anyway. Because if you're a Christian, you believe that is the way. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. At the end of the day, that essentially means that nothing else is a way to God. So, if he proclaims to be the head of the Church of England, then that should be the only real priority religiously that he should be taking, in my opinion. He can wish people well in their celebrations, fine, not an issue. But he tends to go above and beyond as far as I'm concerned.
I would say all eyes on William at this stage, because as you said, apparently it isn't royal protocol to do an Easter message. But perhaps it could have been anticipated. People would notice the absence of it. I said absence then. Can see where my mind is going with this Qatar. People, it's understandable people would notice the absence of it because we live in a perpetual state of culture wars. But I do wonder, lately William has been turning around talking about his quiet personal faith. And it'd be interesting. I get the impression that they're beginning to push him more and more into the limelight, posture him as the future king. So it'd be interesting to see what he has to say during the course of the Easter weekend. Mark, thank you ever so much for your call. Let's speak to Morris, who is in London. Good morning, Morris.
Hi there, Alex. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you perfectly, loud and clear.
Wonderfully. Thanks for letting me on. So I just want to mention that I'm a dad in East London, Hackney, regarding the Clapham disturbances. I saw the message that was shared, I think, on Snapchat, and it looks... I work in tech and AI. It looks very AI to me. And what I mean by that is it looks like the sort of thing you can churn up on an AI system very easily, and it doesn't look like the sort of thing that a kid would create. And the reason I say that is because we had some problems in Hackney recently with someone trying to get the schools to fight each other. And again, it was these very strange messages on TikTok. Didn't look like a kid would do it at all. I contacted the police and said, you need to be using AI to fight the AI. And there's this new AI now called Claude Bot, which means you can set it up. It's free and run it automatically once you're set up. And my hypothesis, I may be wrong, is that, it's AI. These are AIs doing these campaigns have been set up.
So do you think that AI is doing this sort of unilaterally by itself rather than it being a hostile actor trying to tear up our society or someone trying to cause mischief, that it actually could have just been generated by the very existence of AI?
So you have to set it up, first of all, if you're using one of the tools I mentioned. But once you set it up and give it some rules, it runs on as long as you allow it to. And that's my gut feel is, and anyway, the police need the tools to check if it is or not. And that was my message. They can't fight AI with, pocket calculator. They need to be given the proper tools. And, I work in this space, so I know lots of people that are willing to offer those tools. A lot of them are free anyway, because we all want to protect our families and, help the business involved and so forth, and help the kids who are, obviously a bit lost and confused.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I think we need to learn more about what's going on with all of these things. Certainly, it surprises me that this government decided to try and close down X when they suggested that Grok was being used to magic up indecent images of children. And then I look at what's going on with Snapchat and TikTok provoking actual rioting in the streets. And he's silent, isn't he? Doesn't seem to be too concerned about that one. Two-tier Kia. Thank you, Morris, for your call. Morris in London, they're very interesting. I've often wondered what would happen if AI decided it wanted to hack in and get the nuclear codes. I mean, seriously. One day I'm going to ask someone very intelligent that question, but probably might not want to know the answer. Let's go back to the subject of Easter. It is indeed Good Friday, and I think that is a very important day indeed, not just for those of us who are Christians, but Easter weekend I think should be elevated more when it comes to Christian countries. Yes, Christmas is fun, the exchanging of presents, the trees, the lights, the decorations, and Easter to many seems to be the one that for non-Christians is most glossed over. Buy an egg or two, go on an Easter egg hunt, a few extra days off work. But for those of us who do enjoy scripture, Easter is the big one. Let's speak now to the wonderful, beautiful Emma Trimble, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Emma, talk to me about Easter, what it means to you as a Christian, and what you think it should mean to a Christian country.
Well, like you were saying there, Alex, when I was growing up, Easter was sort of the the big holiday that not quite was glossed over, but it didn't have as firm a tradition, at least in my family. I think for many families, it didn't have the firm traditions that Christmas had. It didn't have the sort of the solidity of Christmas Day, for example. Lots of people did things a little bit differently, and I think that was part of the general secularization of our culture, even for those of us who are, you know, nominally Christian. But the reality is, and you said it there about Good Friday, this is the most important day in human history. This is the day that Jesus Christ died and will be resurrected and we'll mark that tomorrow evening. This is the day that mankind was saved by the Son of God. It is the most important weekend in the Christian calendar and the most important day in human history, and the importance of it obviously cannot be emphasized enough. And the reality is actually that in England, and also around the world, but in England particularly, we have our own liturgical traditions. And the liturgy of Easter is so beautiful. So when I came back to Christianity as an adult, was confirmed an Anglican actually just at the beginning of COVID during lockdown, I discovered this beautiful Easter liturgy that runs all the way, actually, not just over Easter itself, but throughout Holy Week, from Palm Sunday through services throughout the week, where people are coming to the end of their fast, which of course many people no longer fast for Lent, but that used to be a big part of Christian culture and the rhythms actually of English life, the rhythms of Christian culture throughout the Christian calendar throughout the year, not just Christmas as the big, but all sorts of things along the way as we go on this annual pilgrimage through Lent towards Easter, towards the cross, towards the death, and then to the resurrection. And that created the rhythms, the basis, the sort of foundations, the soil of English life and of Christian life in England. And it really is the most beautiful thing, I think, that anybody can witness is the Easter liturgy. The liturgy on Friday, on Wednesday, actually, I think there are many church services do a Tenebrae service that is just exquisite. But Good Friday, I will be going to church actually just after I hop off of this call. And on Saturday evenings, churches around the country will be celebrating the resurrection of Christ as we go into Sunday, when people will break their Lenten fast. I mean, it's beautiful, it's moving. And people, I think, are becoming a lot more curious about this great, mysterious and beautiful liturgy that pulls them in and just holds them. And it really is just, as I say, the most beautiful part of the year for me. And I love Easter much more than Christmas.
Now, one thing that I think makes Easter so important is the historicity of Jesus. And I want to talk about that with you, because there'll be plenty of people listening who are not believers. And I know plenty of people who said, I don't know why, I can't believe in the God thing. It hasn't happened to me. And yet what I always say to those people is, whether or not you believe in God, whether or not you believe that Jesus was the Son of God, it doesn't come down to belief whether or not a man called Jesus was born in Nazareth, was a great spiritual leader and teacher, and fundamentally changed the world irrevocably. And it's this historicity that I think is so important at Easter, the fact that we know it is documented by multiple eyewitnesses that there was a man called Jesus Christ who lived, who was a great leader of people, who drew crowds in massive numbers because of the nature of his teachings, because of his miracles. Some might say now saying his miracles, but the fact that this man existed, the fact that he was considered such a subversive threat through his power and influence, that he was then crucified by politicians, by the Romans, and the fact that there were eyewitnesses to this crucifixion, then people might go on, I would go on and say there were plenty of eyewitnesses for the resurrection as well, but people find that bit, when it comes to belief, a bit more difficult. But fundamentally, one thing is clear. You look at the ancient world, the Roman kingdoms of vomitoriums and gladiatorial rings, of multiple wives, of punishment by death, of slavery, of evil, of wickedness, quite frankly. And you see the great shift that happens, not just for Christians, but around the world, where essentially the Ten Commandments seem to have been adopted, politicised, democratised, turned into these supranational organisations such as the UN, which is supposed to defend things such as human rights. You look at that inflection point in all of human history, and I always say to people at Easter, whether or not you believe in God, Jesus was a man who exists and changed the world. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, precisely. So there is a lot of people will say, "Oh, there isn't enough historical evidence." Maybe doubt the existence of that. That he ever existed at all. Too much to go into now, but I mean, there's more evidence for Christ's existence than for many other serious historical figures. But it's also, I think, for many people, they expect that. They think that people who have become Christians maybe have experienced some kind of road to Damascus moment, like St. Paul, an instant conversion. Something has happened to them that makes them believe. They think that there's some exceptional experience that Christians have had that they haven't experienced themselves. And the reality is actually that when you listen to people's stories of how they came to be Christians, there are all sorts of bizarre and circuitous routes. I mean, St. Paul himself held the coats while St. Stephen, the first martyr, was stoned to death. He was part of the early persecution of the Christian community. Many people have gone through these circuitous routes. I myself did. And the reality is actually that there is something very human about Christianity. I mean, obviously because of the incarnation, because Christ became man, dwelt among us. And I think many people have pointed out that if you were to make something up, if you were to make up a religion, you wouldn't actually make up the Christian story because it's far too absurd. It almost suggests that it might be true. I mean, the fact that one of the things that people often point to is that the first witnesses to the resurrection, the first witnesses to the empty tomb were women. But of course, in the ancient world, in both the Roman and in the Jewish world, the witness of women was considered less than that of a man. So why would they make up that the women were the first to witness the empty tomb? There's so much absurdity about the Christian story, so much that subverts expectations, not only in the ancient world, but also within Judaism, that they were expecting this great Messiah that was going to come as a sort of martial victor to save them from the Romans. And instead, what they had is a man hanging on a cross and dying and being resurrected again. This subverted expectations. It didn't make sense to a lot of people. There was an absurdity about the death, the resurrection, and the cross. But I think the thing that really that touches on the core of the experience of those of us who have become Christians, yourself included, Alex, is the realization actually of our own imperfection as human beings, of what theologically is called our fallenness, our fallen human nature. All of us know that we can't become perfect. We know that we have all of these foibles. We know that we're selfish, we're prideful, we're lazy. There are all of these things about us that we can't seem to perfect by our own efforts. And society as well cannot be perfected by our own efforts. It's why utopianism always ends in a bloodbath. And we know this about ourselves when we honestly reflect on who we are as human beings. And for me, that was the thing that led me to Christianity, to the realization that unlike other religions that claim that you can get God's approval by your own efforts, Christianity teaches no, by your own efforts you can never become perfect. You can never become perfect in the eyes of God. But what you are is loved by him. Yeah. And it's by grace that you are saved. And that's the message of Easter, that by grace you're saved despite your imperfections, that God loves you entirely, despite the fact that you're fallen, you're sinful. And the cross and the liturgy of Easter draws you in to God's bosom, as it were. Welcoming you into that reconciliation with God that you couldn't achieve on your own.
I always say that, I think the greatest miracles can be so easily observed. And I just say to people, look at the data, so to speak. There was this ghastly ancient world where horrible things happened. A man was born. And after that moment, things began to seriously change. And as I keep saying, when you look at the great contributions that have advanced humanity, whether it's in medicine, technology, engineering, how an overwhelming amount has come out of Christendom, that it hasn't been out of countries with other religions or no religions, and that actually the greatest scientists of our age throughout history have largely been followers of God. And so ask yourself this, the birth of that man, whether you believe in God or not, how much that has changed the world. That to me is a miracle in plain sight. Emma, do stay with us. We're going to take a short break, but we're going to be speaking with Emma about perhaps how society looks rather frayed at the edges of late. That's coming up after this.
Welcome to Down the Local, the show that goes from pub to pub across the country, speaking to the punters about the subjects driving us all nuts at the moment.
That's Rachel Reeves, Rachel Thieves, Rachel McCounts.
I don't really know Meghan Markle. I know Meghan Markle's from Sinks, that's about it.
I don't know about anyone else, and I don't know where this is going. I have 0% beers, and I feel
raising the flag, I think, is symptomatic of this desperation.
Is public transport good value for money?
No, it isn't.
You really don't like speaking to people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back, and let's welcome Emma Trimble back as well. Emma, what is going on today? All these marauding feral kids turning up in Clapham, looting Marks and Spencer. I mean, the thing is about kids is they do mad things at times. They all sort of like running as a pack. But it's pretty alarming that there's this, what's it called, linking up or something, this trend on social media where everyone goes, yeah, let's go down to Clapham, let's storm it. The police won't be able to get us there. We can do X, Y and Z. And we saw just two arrests from all of this. So understandably, retail executives, including the head of M&S, has accused Sadiq Khan for being soft on crime. I mean, he's got a point.
It's got more than a point, hasn't he? I mean, thank God he said it. But yeah, I've just come back from a trip to Hungary, and it's been quite a culture shock for me. I mean, it was amazing to be in a country where you can walk down the street and not have to worry about your phone being snatched out of your hand. You can leave your bags and your coats around in a bar and no one will nick them. And the whole place just feels so high trust, so secure. You can walk in the streets at night as a woman, and you know that nothing bad is going to happen to you. The rape statistics in Hungary versus the rape statistics here in the UK couldn't possibly be further apart. So coming back to the UK, having not seen all of this Clapham stuff until I arrived back, it's almost like a culture shock in reverse upon returning to my own country. Because the truth is that London is lawless, and Sadiq Khan keeps saying, oh, the crime in London is going down, and that these youths should think about the consequence, or the police chief was saying that the youth should think about the consequences of their actions. There are no consequences to their actions. The state has effectively decriminalised shoplifting. The law doesn't get enforced. You see the police officers in this really hapless way attempting to deal with crime that is running so far outside of their own control. The reality is that for too long, there haven't been any consequences for breaking the law. People have tested, as a child would with a parent, tested what they can get away with and realised that they can get away with anything. And that's what we're seeing. The fruits of that are being born now with all of this lawlessness, all of this. I mean, some of the things mentioned by this M&S boss are just horrific. People who work in their stores being attacked, one person having ammonia thrown in her face and having to be hospitalized. This is disgraceful. And it's not just about law and order. As I say, harking back to the point about Hungary, it's the breakdown of the high trust society that we once had. It's the entropy, the social entropy and fragmentation of our society that we've allowed to happen, that we've sold our culture of good manners, of being well behaved and responsible in public. We've sold that off down the river, we've sold the family silver, as it were. Now we're seeing the consequences. I think partly the consequences of multiculturalism, of giving up on the idea of having one community as a nation, one people that are bound together through trust and social cohesion. We've allowed that to fragment into this completely chaotic mess, and we're seeing the consequences of it every single day. And it's only when you leave and you go to a country like Hungary, as I did, that you realize this weight is lifted off of your shoulders, and it's because you don't have to be hyper vigilant all the time, because you're not constantly worried that you're going to be mugged.
I know that feeling of the weight being lifted, having moved out of London. It's lovely. But what about the exacerbatory, at the very least, impact of social media? Because this is all organised via social media. And my view is this, we on the right who celebrate our God-given freedoms, perhaps we're being a little bit naive when it comes to conflating concepts of freedom of speech, which I would die on that hill, quite frankly, when it comes to freedom of speech. But it's a different thing, isn't it, when social media is being used to organise rioting, or indeed a different thing when social media is used to groom children, or to sell drugs, or to encourage people to self-harm, to convince kids, brainwash them that they're born in the wrong body. Do we need to get real about the impact of social media, particularly on young people?
Well, there are two aspects to this. I think, firstly, that it's bizarre to me that the police, if this stuff is on social media, this stuff is being discussed in public, and incitement to this kind of disorder is there for anybody to see online. I mean, you see the scale of this and you think there's no way that this is spontaneous. This has got to have been organised. And it can't possibly be that there's a WhatsApp chat or something private and encrypted that is, on that kind of scale. So the police should be aware of this and should be putting measures in place to stop it from the get-go. It shouldn't be possible for this to happen. It's the same with a lot of the stuff to do with the human trafficking that's coming across the channel. It's easy enough to see this stuff online. So why is it that law enforcement seems to be either oblivious to it or refusing to act effectively on that information? But the other aspect of this is that Sadiq Khan has issued this statement where he's been saying to social media companies that they should remove remove footage of this stuff online. See, I think that's a serious mistake, because this hasn't really been reported that much across the mainstream media. The way that people discover what is happening in London if they don't live in London, or maybe if they don't live in Clapham, the way that they learn what is happening to the state of their country is because this stuff can be freely shared, and this is a good thing. It helps us to hold power to account. It's a helpful tool in a democracy that this sort of stuff is transparent. We can see what's happening in our country. We can see how badly the police are dealing with it. We can see actually that Sadiq Khan is blooming well lying when he says that crime has gone down, and we can fact check him on that. We can use this as information to say, no, Sadiq Khan, we don't believe a word you say. He's talking about people spreading propaganda about how London has become an unsafe city. Well, frankly, I think, Sadiq Khan, you're the one who's spreading the propaganda because it serves your interests. We're just talking about, to use the left's language, our lived experiences. Yeah. Of being blighted every second of every day by crime. And as I say, you don't realize how tense you are with this hypervigilance until you leave, and then suddenly you can relax because you know that no one's going to come around the corner with a machete or on a bike and snatch your phone out of your hand. So I think the point is that we need to have this stuff online so that people can see it. But it's also important, actually, for law enforcement. They can see what people are doing and they can enforce the law. If they chase it off of social media, it's only going to go into, encrypted chats. And we don't want the law enforcement using this as an excuse to invade our privacy as law-abiding citizens who are using encrypted messaging services. We shouldn't have our rights deprived because they're failing to enforce the law properly. So I think, on the one hand, keep this stuff online. The people need to see it. But it's a question of whether or not law enforcement are actually doing their job. Because I think what we've seen also with even with lower level crimes, like I say lower level, it's not lower level because actually these things escalate. It's the broken windows theory of law enforcement. You deal with the smaller things and the bigger things sort of look after themselves. We have simply not been enforcing the law on things like shoplifting and muggings and so on, and so that's how we've gotten to this point. So the police have to deal with those things effectively, and frankly it seems that they're more interested in knocking on people's doors over tweets. They seem to have the resources to do that, but not the resources to deal with actual crime. If the police were spending all of their time and resources dealing with real crimes rather than dealing with things that people say that they find politically incorrect, then maybe we wouldn't have to have all of these complaints about how much money is being put into the police if they were actually doing their jobs more effectively.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Emma, thank you ever so much. The brilliant Emma Trimble, ladies and gentlemen. Right, we are going to take a short break. After that, we're joined by Elliot Wilson, writer and senior fellow for national security at the Coalition for Global Prosperity. I'll be asking him about some of the things that have been going on in America, including Defence Secretary, or Secretary of War, as he likes to be called, Pete Hegseth, firing the highest-ranking US Army officer right in the middle of the Iran war. What's going on? We're going to be finding out after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, hello. There you are. Welcome back. There I am, I should say, more like, during the advert break. I'm trying to cover it up, but I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. I've got some head cold going on and had a bit of a bad night's sleep as a result of congestion and having to get up really early in the morning. And I decided during the advert break I was going to rest my eyes. So I was sitting here with my hand in my head and I was listening to the adverts to try and make sure I stayed compos mentis and awake, and my eyes were shut like this. And all of a sudden in the studio, Sam, the tech op, went, "Hello!" and put it up full volume. Honestly, I almost fell off the chair. Certainly resurrected me in the spirit of Easter, that's for sure. Right, let us try and demystify what is going on in America, because the Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth ousted the highest-ranking US Army officer, General Randy George, who was a Biden appointee, where he was told to step down and take immediate retirement. Apparently he had clashed with the administration's vision for the army, but it seems a rather interesting thing to do in the middle of a military campaign, particularly one that could lead to boots on the ground. Well, let's speak now to Elliot Wilson, Writer and Senior Fellow for National Security at the Coalition for Global Prosperity. Elliot, what do you think is going on here? Why has General Randy George been told he's going to be put out to pasture?
Well, it seems there is some kind of sort of ideological or philosophical difference between the chief of staff and the politicians in the Pentagon, but this is part of a pattern. I mean, Donald Trump has been in office now for just over 14 months, and so far we've seen the departure of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the head of the Navy and the Air Force, as well as quite a few other very senior officers. That's now the head of the Army going, so it's a clean sweep of the main three services. And there clearly is some kind of purge going on of senior military officers for various reasons, but principally, I think, because the Trump administration doesn't want advice or candid disagreement. It wants absolute loyalty. That's always been Donald Trump's approach to everything. And Pete Hegseth is very much in that mold. So clearly this is a decision to remove somebody who is perhaps not wholly on board with whether it's the strikes on Iran or military policy more generally. But it is worrying that the sources of alternative advice are being winnowed away.
Is it worrying, or is it the case that, that America has chosen to go down a certain path? It's at a critical juncture in that path, and perhaps they need people who are going to provide solutions and not problems?
I think it's unlikely that the head of all three services and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the vice chief of the air staff and all the various other generals who've been sacked were all dedicated to a different vision of military or security policy from the administration. I mean, these are very, very senior officers. They've served under administrations of both kinds. They've served under innumerable presidents. The role of the military is to provide advice and then to do what it's instructed to do within the Constitution and the law. And if you can't do that, you have two alternatives. You can either walk or you can put up with doing something which you disagree with. But I think that the chances of everybody being so opposed to what Donald Trump wants to do and what Pete Hegseth wants to do, compared to Pete Hegseth's very ideological view of what the military should look like, and a very limited view of what the military should look like, I think it is worrying that this kind of narrow, slightly macho, chest-beating, war-fighting spirit the Pentagon is being pursued quite so ruthlessly.
He's also got rid of former Attorney General Pam Bondi. And it looks from the outside, from everything that's been said, she's great. We all love Pam. She's going off to do an exciting job in the private sector. Yes, I'm so excited. I love President Trump. This is a brilliant new appointment. But everyone else is going, she's been fired. Why do you think that's happened?
I think there's clearly some lasting unhappiness with the way the Epstein files were handled, because it was her job as Attorney General and head of the Department of Justice to release and redact the files. I think the funny thing about Donald Trump is that he's very forgiving of failure. He has to be with the sort of people he appoints. But what he isn't forgiving of is failure which touches on him. And clearly the Epstein files have been an embarrassment for him. And so he's decided that the Attorney General is surplus to requirements, in the same way that Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary was surplus to requirements. But we know that he'll happily change his personnel as often as he needs. He's done it much less in this term than he did in his last. But, you know, she clearly outlived her usefulness, but she's probably doing the sensible thing and staying on his good side for at least the next 2 years. There's no benefit to be had from starting a fight.
Now, very predictably, the war with Iran has led to the near closure, or all but a few people closure, of the Strait of Hormuz, something that has been priced in from the beginning. The American operation in the Pentagon, or those people we were talking about earlier who served with the military, would have factored in this closure of the Strait of Hormuz with any sort of face down with Iran. The UK's turned around and said we're not going to pay Strait of Hormuz tolls, although, you know, we are one of a number of nations who perhaps rely quite heavily upon the Strait of Hormuz being opened. And then America's sort of saying to NATO, saying to the Europeans, right, you want your oil, you want your gas, you want that opened, you've got to go help do it yourself. What do you think is going on here? Is America going to have to go this alone? Will they force the Strait of Hormuz to be reopened? Can they? How is this going to impact upon, well, everybody else?
It's if they are proposing to force the strait open while there's still a conflict going on, that's going to be enormously difficult and put, you know, vessels and people's lives in enormous danger. So that's a really difficult military operation. And also mine clearance is very, very difficult. The Americans can afford to walk away to an extent because obviously they're the world's biggest producer of oil. They've got much more reserves than we have. Europe cannot be quite as sanguine about it. But it's one of those things where, you know, each side has a point, but each side is also messing it up quite badly. The idea that we're going to head some kind of coalition to clear the Strait of Hormuz, it's the coalition of the willing from Ukraine again. It's got no clear mission. We don't have the assets to enforce it, but we'll have a team meeting, you know, like it was the pandemic and you're in and off. And we'll all feel good about ourselves because we're providing international leadership. But we've seen when we tried to get a destroyer to Cyprus a few weeks ago that our assets in naval terms are spread incredibly thinly. We have one attack submarine available. We have one, maybe two destroyers. We've got probably half a dozen frigates. I mean, we really don't have the assets to contribute in a meaningful sense to any large coalition if it's going to be done in sort of conflict circumstances.
That is my concern indeed. Elliot, thank you ever so much. Elliot Wilson there, writer and senior fellow for national security at the Coalition for Global Prosperity. Like I said, I think it's going to be a pretty busy weekend militarily. I don't know. It's not like I'm connected to anyone in the Pentagon or the White House, but just looking at how things have played out in times past, I have a feeling things are going to heat up. Will we be dragged into this? Should we? Those are the big questions on everybody's lips. Right, now after the break, we're going to be talking about Hugh Edwards, who says he is ready to tell his own story. And also looking at the BBC, did they do the right thing getting rid of Scott Mills when, well, he was investigated and the CPS said not enough evidence to prosecute anybody, and that was years ago. Why his sudden sacking now? We're discussing all of that after this.
Good morning to you. This is Claude, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Just breaking news in the last couple of moments. Extraordinary news. Not just that the police have arrived at the Sandringham estate where Prince Andrew, as was now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, is currently living since being thrown out of the Windsor estate. The police have arrested Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It's an extraordinary revelation. And certainly what's been contained in the Epstein files was released in the last few weeks. It's his 66th birthday today. What a birthday present that is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and welcome back to the show. Let's talk now about the BBC. Let's talk now about Hugh Edwards. Apparently he said he is ready to tell his story. The disgraced former newsreader who pleaded guilty in 2024 to making indecent images of children has apparently had hired a bit of a PR supremo who said that he's been bombarded with offers for Hugh to tell his side of what went on. Let's speak to Roger Bolton, former BBC executive. Roger, I mean, when it comes to crimes that, that people feel that others can be forgiven for and those which will tarnish you irredeemably, one would think that making indecent images of children, which of course means downloading them, it doesn't actually mean they're, rolling a camera, are very hard to forgive. And yet it seems Hugh Edwards is quite keen on putting his side of the story across. Did you know anything about this? Do you think it could work?
Well, what does work mean? I mean, I think there's clearly he's delusional. That's the thing. I think what's striking about this, that in his private world, which I think nobody knew about, his family didn't know about, he developed a justification for his behaviour, which is delusional. What he does was appalling. And, if you talk about forgiveness, the first thing that matters about forgiveness is that you are honest and open about what you've done and ask for forgiveness. He still seems to think in some ways that he's been hard done by. Well, he's entitled to his point of view, but I'd be astonished if anybody made a documentary. And if he, from his private resources, makes a documentary, commissions one, I can't believe any of the broadcasters would put it out. Might find its way onto the internet. But I'm afraid this speaks more to his mental state than it does to anything else.
What do you make of the surprise sacking, some might say, of Scott Mills, considering that it would appear, we don't really know what's gone on, but it would appear that he has been relieved of his duties with Radio 2 on the basis of behaviours or activities that were investigated back in 2017. No charges resulted after that investigation. So why is it that years later he's now losing his job because apparently more information has come to light?
Well, the truth is we don't know, and this is what the problem is. I mean, on the one hand, these events took place in the last millennium, in about 1995 or 7, the alleged events. It appears to most people, and I do not know this because the BBC hasn't spoken about it, nor has Scott Mills' representatives or he himself. The additional information is assumed to be, but the person involved, allegedly involved in this, was under 16 in, I say, about 1997. What I think you have to do is to see this in the context of the BBC determined, and an outgoing Director General, determined to, as it were, clear the decks and make it absolutely clear that this sort of behaviour would not be accepted. On the other hand, and also, as I understand it, the BBC's lawyers are telling the Director General, you can't spell any more detail because there might be legal consequences for that. So we're left with a situation where the BBC can't spell out or won't spell out the detail, and where Scott Mills, while accepting that he was interviewed, will not say any more than that. It's very unfortunate. It's a question of who you believe, who you trust. And I don't know what you do. By the way, when you came onto this program, you had a headline which said just below you about the Director General saying that the BBC would never fix its problems. Actually, what he said was, in talking to staff, it'll never be the culture, talking about the culture. It'll never be fully fixed, but I really think it's changing. I really do. Well, he's being honest, isn't he? I mean, we can never fix human nature, absolutely.
It's funny you say that, Roger, because in the first hour, that's exactly what I said myself. You know, this is almost like Tim Davie going, look, we're always going to live in a world where people suck up to those people in the public eye, where we might be intimidated by their particular presence, their fame, perhaps even their infamy, where there will be built-in hierarchies where people might tell porcupines and defend people who perhaps they shouldn't. But actually, the BBC is learning from its mistakes. And maybe this is something that Tim Davie wanted to very outwardly demonstrate with the sacking of Scott Mills. But how bad is the culture within the BBC? I mean, I worked there eons ago, and we've all seen from the outside looking in various people who appear to have gotten away with all sorts of heinous crimes and regrettable acts who have been protected by the corporation, perhaps because of their fame, because of their celebrity, perhaps because of this sort of perceived influence they might have. But is the BBC really learning from mistakes, or is there still this sort of cultish protection around the talent?
Well, I still think the BBC is among the best, if not the best, in terms of dealing with these things. It can't change human nature. I think that it has put procedures in place, but the problem is celebrity, essentially. And you know what's happened in the last few years, that celebrities are thought to be far more important than they were because there's increased amount of competition and therefore people identify with individuals. Those individuals are getting paid a lot more. And if you're not careful, they begin to, behave in unacceptable ways. I think you've got to have tough management. I mean, I have some sympathy for presenters. I've spent most of my life behind the camera as an editor and so on, executive, but I have presented programs on radio and so on. And I've noted, this is a stressful job. I remember David Dimbleby, for example, who worked on general election programs, who is a kind, decent man. In a half hour before going on an all-nighter doing general election, he's really tense. He snapped at me 2 or 3 times. He apologized afterwards. But no wonder he's going to do the general election for God knows how many hours live, doesn't know what's going to happen. He's got to fend off everything. Of course he's tense, and of course you've got to allow for that. But off camera and in terms of relationships, no, the behavior that in the past would have been allowed should not happen. And I do think that it's a cultural problem throughout the industry. I think it's improving. It's a particular problem, though, when you get to the pop culture, because when people are in the pop world, there's a lot of drugs being taken. There's a lot of wild behavior. You tend to want to have presenters who are credible, if you like, and who know what's going on, but somehow have refused everything they've been offered. That's a tough call. I mean, personally, what I know about Scott Mills, I know nothing about the events that may or may not happen, but he's widely liked. He's been open about personal problems that he's had. I hope that after he has to do this, really comes out and spells out what's happened. I hope after a while he could go and work again in the industry, but perhaps for no one else. But for the rest of us, it's, who do we believe? The BBC, Scott Mills, the person who's made the allegations that we don't know. It's impossible on the basis of the evidence, to be sure.
No, indeed it is. Indeed it is, Roger. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. Always great to get your view on these things. It is interesting because, in some respects, I sort of feel celebrity culture is really changing because now there is... Once upon a time, there were just these huge celebrities who almost felt like people you knew, family, friends, because they'd be on your telly box almost every night. Whereas now there's so many channels, so many influencers, people I've never heard of on YouTube, who young people, absolutely obsessed with. And I wouldn't know them if I stood in a bus queue with them, not that they would be doing that anytime soon. And then you sort of look at the culture within certain companies, certain industries, how much more some presenters are paid than the people who, without them, they wouldn't be able to do their job. And you think, is that fair? Is that right? Is that culture finally beginning to shift? I certainly hope it is. because I don't think it is fair and I don't think it is right. I'm humbled every single day by the wonderful people behind that glass I'm looking through right now in the gallery. Aren't they wonderful? If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to do this job. Keeps my feet on the ground, that's for sure. But anyway, who am I? But a Z-list who keeps you wonderful people company. Thank you for having me, by the way, over the Easter weekend. I'm going to be here Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday. Right, and I'm also going to be here for the next hour as well. So pour yourself another brew and I will see you very shortly.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And welcome back. Oh, look, I was in the dark then for a moment. I was just moaning to them during the advert break about trips to the moon and hating the International Space Station. I like trips to the moon, though. Then it was suddenly dark there, as if I'd been projected into the outer realms of the known universe. I do quite like this Artemis too. Although, I must say, raises a few questions. Have you thought that as well? Because I'll tell you what's funny about this. So I'm just going on a bit of a freestyle here. There is so much sort of, celebration and joy. You had crying reporters in Cape Canaveral as the rocket took off, looking at the... someone described it. I listened to one report, I can't remember which channel it was on, and the journalist was describing it like an angel shrouded in light as the rocket, engulfed by flames, took up into the heavens. And people go, this is such an important day for humanity, crying. And I'm like, I thought we did this, back in the 1970s. Thought we did this 50 years ago. I mean, I think it's great. I love the fact we're going back to the moon. Excellent. Very excited to see what the dark side of the moon looks like. Only one man got to do that, didn't he? When Armstrong and Aldrin were out jumping around on the Earth's surface, there he was, tracking back all by himself. So, no, I think it's brilliant. I love looking at humanity achieving great things. But there is part of me, and I don't want to stick on a tinfoil hat, and I'm not going to do that. I'll tell you for why. Because my own grandfather was one of the first people to study the rock samples brought back from the moon. So I don't want to start going, well, you know, no one actually went to the moon. They stuck a ruddy great flag there. You'd think that if that hadn't happened, everyone with their big, super strong telescopes today would be able to say, there isn't a flag there. They didn't go there first time around. But how did we get there in the 1970s with computer technology that's about as good as that which runs a Casio calculator, and it's taken 50 years to do it again? Like I said, the whole thing raises a lot of questions in my mind. If you're a bit of a moon mission expert, then do let me know. I love this stuff. I find it absolutely fascinating. So if you know stuff that I don't know, 03444991000 is the number to call, or to send me a WhatsApp, or leave me a voice note, or you can text me 87222. Like the word talk before your moon message. Right, sorry. With that thought dispatched, let us now catch up with the brilliant Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor, not of the moon, but the sun. Good morning to you, or good afternoon to you, Trevor. It's 4 minutes past 12, so we're now in the PM section of the day. Before we go on to other stories, what do you make of the Artemis 2 mission to the moon?
Well, I think it's a fantastic thing to watch, and it must be marvellous for them to be out there looking at the Earth from up in the heavens, and they're looking at the moon from the other side. And I think it's one of the most exciting things for the younger generation that they've experienced. I mean, we've been through the Apollo missions and the man on the moon, and that's a very long time ago. I remember watching it in Australia, and in those days, the people used to stand outside shops selling televisions where all the screens were showing in colour the first steps on the moon. Very, very exciting indeed, and so is this.
I do find it very exciting, and I love the fact that we're all getting behind it, how important that is as well. Right, from the positive to the negative, as the head of retail at Marks and Spencer has accused Sadiq Khan of being soft on crime, basically saying you can't pull the wool over our eyes. You keep saying that London isn't unsafe, that crime is down. But essentially, Thenis McKeeve, Marks and Spencer's retail director, has said, well, to us, that seems rather a lot like a pack of lies. And given what happened in Clapham, these hordes of feral kids meeting up to sort of mass loot the shops on the high street, you tend to have to agree with him. What on earth is going wrong, especially in London?
Well, I think that's actually quite shocking and dangerous and alarming, because these aren't just random bits of shoplifting in groups which are bad enough on their own. I think it's a collapse of the standards of society when things like that are allowed to carry on right under the nose of staff. This is organised, mob-handed vandalism and theft, and it's and not only is it vandalism and theft, but it's armed robbery, because many of these youngsters are armed with swords and machetes and knives, and you know this, and they're all wearing the same sort of uniform. It's like a sort of an invasion of the aliens coming in to steal from under our noses, and completely without any consequences.
When you look at some of the statistics on this, I mean, anyone who lives in London will have seen that no more can shops on any particular busy thoroughfare have displays of produce out. Doors have to be locked at the moment. In many shops, you can't, there's not a separate entry and exit door, because people would be using the second egress to run in and nick stuff. Similarly, you go into Boots, they don't have perfume on the perfume displays anymore. You can't pick up a bottle and have a smell to see if you like it or not, because that would be nicked. In shops such as Co-op, they're having to put meats inside big sort of fortified plastic safes of GPS trackers on. And looking at this, apparently there were 1,600 incidents of violence and abuse against retail workers every day last year. There are no consequences for what's once upon a time would be called petty crime. And then also doing a deep dive into some of the messages that these kids are exchanging in chat groups, where they're saying, oh, if we go here, the police won't be able to get to us. If they do, it's very easy. Just accuse them of being racist. I mean, it's very clear that this sort of softly, we've got to have equal outcomes approach, rather than everyone being equal under the eyes of the law, that seems to have been adopted over the past 10 years, is now harvesting these devastating consequences.
Well, I think so. And I think I can remember the time, and I'm sure you can, when people you knew who fell foul of shoplifting themselves became socially ostracized as a result. You thought they were rather odd, and people sort of shied away from them. Why would you go shoplifting when you're perfectly capable of paying for them? That sort of attitude does not take place anymore. It's shame is an old-fashioned issue. It is extinct. There is no such thing as shame anymore, no embarrassment. In fact, quite the reverse. People set out to do extremely shameful and embarrassing things, but with a sort of complete disregard for everybody else in the country.
Let's talk about Ed Miliband, who has called reopening oil wells an act of climate vandalism, but does seem to be considering enabling gas fields in the North Sea to generate fossil fuels for us to supply at least 1 million homes this winter. I mean, could there be a moment of common sense, light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to Red Ed and his mad climate policies?
I think not so much common sense as blind panic. I think what we're seeing here is the impact of a real war on the flow of commerce and fuel and food and fertilizer around the world, beginning to prove and show the appalling stupidity of this government's policies on the economy, on tax, on the farmer, on the oil industry, on fuel. Everything that they've brought in through purely partisan political policies is beginning to creak under the strain of reality. And I think that whether or not Ed Miliband is prepared to go further on this, I think if this war continues, as I fear it might, I think that he's going to be forced into U-turns on a whole range of other things, including perhaps even fracking.
Wow, that would be the day, wouldn't it? Let's talk now about Sir Keir Starmer, who apparently is plotting a new Brexit betrayal on the 10th anniversary of the referendum. I mean, this has been going on for ages. We knew under a Labour government that they wanted to reset our relationship with the EU, and it seems to me they're going to be doing everything but rejoining it. The things that send a shiver down my spine especially is joining a defence pact and this youth mobility scheme where the EU is saying you can't have a cap on it. Emergency leaver maybe, but no cap. What's the likelihood, do you think, of Starmer bottling it and essentially allowing unprecedented numbers of young people from across Europe? And I hesitate to suggest that these young people aren't necessarily going to be Germans coming over here to pull pints, but rather the under-30s who have broken into the continent illegally and been given the right to remain. How likely is it that he's going to give in to the EU?
Well, 100%, maybe 110. Look, I think that one of the points you just made there is that we will have no choice over the people they usher across the borders into this country, as indeed France is doing in the Channel crossings right now. And there is an example already in Australia where, as you know, I've lived and have family, where Anthony Albanese has agreed to accept immigrants from the European Union in return for other favors. And what has happened is that they now have real problems with immigrants who are causing difficulties in various suburbs of Sydney and other major capital cities. And I don't need to spell out exactly what those problems are or what they're likely to be here in this country, as we are finding they jettison those they don't want in Europe and sending them here.
It's strange, isn't it? I always feel like Albanese and Starmer are often in lockstep with one another, and that Starmer will pick up the phone to him and say, we want to do this, will you join us? It was certainly the case when it came to this sort of suggestion of banning X off the back of Grok and people using it to create indecent images of children. Do you think we'll follow suit when it comes to banning social media for the under-16s? How's that going in Australia, do you reckon?
Well, I think that they are in lockstep simply because they are of the same socialist cut of the cloth. So I think that voting for under-16s, the social media, because voting for under-16s is another issue, but yeah. The social media, I think, is probably a good idea, but how well it's being policed has yet to materialize. I think the idea is good. I think that children should be protected from this hideous intrusion into the growing up process, the maturing of the brains of these youngsters, which is being, I think, distorted by the weird things you see on TikTok, and which are pretty well unrestricted because parents can't, once they've handed a smartphone to a child, it's pretty hard to stop them ranging far and wide on that. And we've seen the consequences in our own homes many times too.
It's strange, isn't it? You know, all of a sudden it's not okay for kids under 16 to have social media, but the minute they hit 16, they can vote, they can do everything. It's, you know, they pick and choose how vulnerable children are, don't they? But depending on what suits them. I kind of think it's especially when you look at what the head of the National Union of Teachers, whatever it was, said the other day about, we need to put into the curriculum all this stuff that's anti-reform, pro-immigration. Great, take away their social media, give them the vote, and we'll all be getting Zach Polanski as the next Prime Minister, which is a ghoulish thought. Let's talk about the BBC. Let's talk about Hugh Edwards potentially trying to make some sort of comeback. It won't be with the BBC, it seems. Does anyone out there have any sympathy with Hugh Edwards? Was that Channel 5 drama based around him a fair portrayal? Because, I know lots of people. I worked at BBC Wales myself. In fact, he was Professor Emeritus of Cardiff Journalism School that I went to, and a lot of people were incredibly shocked when it transpired what Hugh Edwards might have been up to, because he had lots of fans within the industry. Is that enough alone for him to make some sort of comeback, or is he gone? Is it done?
Well, you'd assume that he's gone and that it is done, but it's surprising how sort of ghoulish and intrusive people want to be in these sort of affairs. I think there is an audience out there for his version of events, simply because there's an audience for almost any freak show that comes onto television. So, yes, I think he could actually make himself very rich on that basis, but he'll never come back in the real sense of being accepted as a serious professional journalist again. And, the drama documentary was very authentic and highly praised for its authenticity. And I think it was compelling and a very worrying, disturbing experience to watch it.
And what do you make of Tim Davie, outgoing Director General, basically saying that, the BBC culture will never be fixed? In many respects, he's saying, look, humans are humans. There's always going to be issues, but things are definitely changing. And he seemed to really want to hammer that point home by sacking Scott Mills. We don't fully know what's gone on there, but what do you make of this?
Well, to me, it's been a complete surprise, simply because I'd never heard of Scott Mills until he was on the front pages. But that's not the point here. I think what Tim Davie was saying was that you're never going to be completely able to remove the problems of dealing with people who are regarded as, quotes, the talent. So they get away with murder simply because they are household names, big draws on the television screens and so on. But I think that his remarks probably should be interpreted as going wider than that, which is that the culture of the BBC is deeply entrenched, that it is a sort of culture which is inward-looking and repels all sorts of any sort of inspection or criticism from outside. And as long as it is like that, with the sort of people who agree with each other on every aspect of whatever The Guardian writes in the mornings, I think that then we're doomed to a BBC that is, as he points out, impossible to change.
I think you're absolutely spot on with that one. Trevor, thank you ever so much for joining me this afternoon. The brilliant Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor of The Sun, everyone's favourite Aussie, perhaps alongside Samara Gill. Right, OK, we're going to be taking a short break now, but after that we're going to be discussing this big old Brexit betrayal. It's all very well moaning about what he might do. What are the things he's going to do? How bad is it going to be? Why is it such a bad idea to do this? Or perhaps it's a good idea? Well, the jury might be out, but I think you know what I think about all of this. We'll be discussing that just after this.
morning to you. This is Tour de Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Just breaking news in the last couple of moments. Extraordinary news. Not just that the police have arrived at the Sandringham estate where Prince Andrew, as was now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, is currently living since being thrown out of the Windsor estate. The police have arrested Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It's an extraordinary revelation. And certainly what's been contained in the Epstein files as released in the last few weeks. It's his 66th birthday today. What a birthday present that is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back. Let's do some messages and take some calls before we progress down the tunnel of news. Trump says, go get your own gas and oil. We have plenty. Why aren't we buying from America anyway, says Stephen in London. Well, this is what America's been saying to everyone. We've got loads. Buy it from us instead. Well, we get most of ours from Norway, of course, because it's much closer. But the ridiculous thing is it's coming out of the same North Sea as our own supplies could come out from. Mad Mark in Selby, or is it just Mark in Selby? Because the way it's written, it looks like you're calling yourself Mad Mark there. Hope I didn't insult you. Says, back to the moon, you say. Come, come, my lady. If we could get to the moon, never mind land and leave it. The Chinese would be today, mining it within an inch of its life while having a huge military base there. Duh. Well, this is the thing. The Chinese have managed to get craft to the moon, as have India, to the southern bit of the moon where all those mineral-rich deposits may well be. But this is going to be it. It's the new space race, isn't it? This is sort of the progression of the Cold War, if it ever did end. We're back once again. We're trying to outdo one another when it comes down to intergalactic prowess. I don't want to naysay it. I love the fact that we're doing this. It shuts up all of those Just Stop Oil lunatics. Look at all those emissions coming out the back of that rocket. I love the idea that humanity wants to reach new frontiers, but where is this all going? Well, apparently the plan is to send a crewed mission, is it by 2028, to actually land on the moon and then begin trying to assemble some sort of base. Imagine that in our lifetimes. We'll look at the moon one day and see this sort of, shadowy mark, which is going to be giant factories and conurbations. Who knows? We're definitely heading back into an era of exploration after at least half a century where we kind of sat on our hands and did nothing. And I'm all for it. And I love the competition going on over in America, because you got NASA, you got SpaceX, you got Jeff Bezos trying to send things into space, got our very own Richard Branson trying to do the same. Where are we in all of this? Where's Britain? We've got some of the best universities in the world. Come on, chop, chop, let's get involved. Love to see it. Let's take a call now and speak to Grace, who's in London. Hello there, Grace. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you.
What's on your mind, my darling?
Well, briefly on the subject of space, since you were talking about it, I think it's interesting to look at how, given that you were talking earlier about evidence regarding Jesus, that there's also quite a bit of evidence for God's existence from science of the universe, which is quite interesting to look at. But it was really good to hear you talking about how the historical evidence does support Jesus having risen. And I know that sounds completely nuts to people, and I used to think it was myself, but it's worth looking into. And it is obviously massively significant in that his teachings have influenced our culture and so many other cultures as well. And they wouldn't have spread around the world if he hadn't died and risen, because it was only because of that miraculous event that people shared his word around the world. And so whilst we're thinking about things about our culture that matter to us, even if it feels like our culture is a mess, we still have the hope that Jesus offers. And I think it's a shame that the king didn't want to do an Easter message, because I think that's such a great message to be sharing. At the same time, he's not obligated, and there's no point in him saying that he's Christian if he actually isn't. But I do think it's worth talking about, and it seems like it would have been a nice thing for the monarch to do, particularly at a time when things are so tumultuous. But again, it's a personal choice to believe, so it's not just about heritage or history or the tradition or the monarch being the head of the church. It really is a personal decision, and if he doesn't believe it, then that's up to him, I guess.
I'll be interested to see, actually, what the BBC is going to be doing to point us in the direction of Easter over the forthcoming days. I'd love to see them broadcast The Passion of Christ, the film, lots of church services, people explaining what Easter's all about. And I've always liked the idea of arguing for the historicity of Jesus, because at the end of the day, there's very few people out there from the world of science and history who would suggest he doesn't exist. I think everyone's sort of unified on the idea that there was this incredible teacher called Jesus who's had a life-changing, humanity-changing impact on planet Earth, and that itself, I think, deserves more platforming. Grace, it's always lovely speaking to you, my darling. Let's catch up again soon. Right, now let's talk about Brexit betrayal, because Starmer is cozying up to his buddies in Brussels. They've been holding fortnightly conflabs about what Britain can do, how we can start following the rules again for a more frictionless trade, as they like to say, which basically means paying to be dictated to by Brussels what we can and can't do when it comes to agriculture. We've now decided to align ourselves dynamically with their net zero agenda, which to me is screaming madness, particularly given what is now going on. Ain't that right, Ed Miliband? But also, I'd suggest more ominously, is the suggestion that we could be going back into some form of freedom of movement, albeit for those under the age of 30. But let's be fair, would you be more disturbed if it was pensioners wanting to come and retire over in Britain, or people under the age of 30? Because they're the people who are most likely to impact upon university spaces, on jobs, but also more likely to come from a cohort who might themselves not come from Europe. And then there is the Defence Pact. Well, let's speak to Rob Bruce, who was a former member of the European Parliament between 2019 and 2024. Great to see you, Rob, me old mucker. It's been a while. Let's talk now. Why on earth would Britain want to realign itself with what I consider to be a failing bloc? Try and explain to people out there why a reversal of Brexit is not going to bring good things.
Well, to me, it sounds like West Germany during the Cold War asking Moscow to join the Soviet Union. It's really strange. The UK fought hard to reclaim control over its laws, borders and trade, and rejoining would mean surrendering that autonomy back to the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. It's the EU's failure to enforce its own external borders has exposed deep structural weakness, leaving member states to deal with the consequences of policies they cannot control. And also the Green Deal, that's a textbook case of ideology overriding reality and crippling industries. You already mentioned it, inflating energy costs and ignoring basic economic and physical constraints. So, yeah, I don't see any clue for the UK to return. Of course, you can have economic cooperation, but if I were you, I would stay as independent as possible, sovereign.
What about joining some sort of defence pact? Because there seems to me this splintering going on at the heart of NATO, a rift between the United States of America and European nations. And no doubt the EU will use this potential crisis as a way in which to gain more powers. They've wanted to push things like PESCO, and having, joint weapons procurement and joint military exercise, conjoined armed forces and so on and so forth. They've been pushing for this for a very long time. It scares the living daylights out of me, because when I look at Europe and look at defence, they're often not really in the same sentence. That Europe doesn't seem to be able to defend anything, let alone itself. Why would we want to side with them?
Yeah, well, it's always the same playbook. They always use a crisis to gain more power, to take policies that are in the member states back to Brussels. They have used the financial crisis to gain more power. Then they created the climate crisis to gain more power. Then we had COVID to gain more power. And then we had Ukraine, and now we have war, etc. It's always the same playbook. It's not in the people's interest. The EU should work for the people, make people's lives better financially, and also as in in welfare, etc. But it is the opposite. The people are now working for Brussels, and yes, this war that they and the NATO spending is another thing that I'm afraid that will create more debt. It's always creating more debt. Now with the energy crisis, they're also talking about creating more debt. They did it during the COVID crisis, and of course France is very in favor of that, because there are many member states in Europe that already are bankrupt for 10 years already. If you see what their population is doing, it's declining. They don't have, they don't save for the pensions, so the working class is now working for the pensions of the elderly. The people are having less children. So with all this debt, they cannot pay that in the near future. And if you join the EU again, you will be responsible for that. And they now are already talking about the same measures as during COVID. And that means also creating common debt, which is against the EU treaties. And they see this as a way to solve the problems. And of course, France is in favor, because France is really the one that is bankrupt already. Also their rating is declined. And yeah, it would be, it's not going to help the people in the UK. That's what I can say.
Well, I think you and I definitely both agreed on that one, Rob, and probably most other things as well. Rob Roos, ladies and gentlemen, who was a member of the European Parliament. We overlapped by 6 months, but of course we in Britain campaigned to leave. So 6 months is the length of my tenure there, and jolly good indeed too that it was. Right, we're going to be taking a short break now. When we come back, we're going to be discussing whether or not junior doctors could now start striking every single month. Was reform right to bring back or suggest that they would keep the triple lock on pensions? And what about Labour's mansion tax? If you own a pricey property over £2 million, you could find yourself having to pay an annual lump sum. All of that is coming up after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Now, lots of things to discuss politically, in terms of domestic politics especially, and here to guide us through the lot of it is Will Hutton, political economist and columnist at The Observer. Chewing over my words a bit there, Will. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. Let's begin, first of all, with junior doctors, the BMA, going on strike again. I have some sympathy with Sir Keir Starmer saying you can't just pocket a 30% pay rise and then come back for more. That should have been the end of it. But they don't seem to be backing down despite the loss of these 1,000 training posts that the Prime Minister has said, well, if you go on strike, then I'm afraid we're not going to be able to afford those things again because we'll have to pay for your cover. And yet it seems they're just going to carry on doing this. We've got 7 million people on waiting lists. Things are only going to get worse, aren't they?
Well, they're certainly going to carry on going on strike until they reballot in August. The last strike around just after Christmas didn't impact on hospitals as much as people feared. And I think this strike may be the same story. They're trying to encourage senior consultants to come out with them, but I'm not sure that senior consultants have said it to the junior doctors. I mean, their feeling is that they got to doubt, like you, that they got a very good pay rise when Labour first got elected back in the summer of 2024. But there's and I think listeners should know that the public sector pay in Britain is governed by a series of pay review boards that are set up to go and it could be policemen, could be armed services, it could be whatever walk of life you work in the public sector. There's a review board system, and the review board make recommendations about what people should get, reflecting what people get in comparable jobs in the private sector, taking account things like the slightly more generous pensions you often get in the public sector, et cetera, et cetera. And to concede this by the government would drive a coach and horses through that system, would be a green light for other unions to come out similarly. It would be I hate to say this because I wish it wasn't true, but the world's bond markets kind of look at Britain as a one-way option. Sell British government debt because it always goes down and you'll make money, and interest rates will go up. And if the government was to concede this, you'd get a kind of bond market crisis. I mean, and it would be a signal for wage inflation across the public sector. So it really, actually the government's got no option but to kind of do what it's doing. And in my view, it's right to do it. And I don't think that this pay claim, which would actually take junior doctors' pay relative to the rest of the public sector, and indeed kind of rest of the average wages across the country to the highest ever level ever been at. And I'm not sure that the job is kind of. I guess you'd argue that they would argue that we're worth it. And actually, when you see a program like The Pit, and you see what an A&E kind of what it's like in A&E, that's in the United States, I know, but some of the kind of working conditions and pressures on junior doctors are no less intense. They would counter with that. But it's you've got to be rational, and actually the pay review boards are rational. I mean, they take that into account. They're not they hear representations from doctors about what they're worth, and they pitch the pay in terms of the stress levels engaged in it. I mean, I kind of, I support the pay review board. I support the system of pay review boards. I support the principle of trade unionism, but this is a step too far.
Let's talk now about the pensions triple lock reform, saying they're going to keep it, but say that they would afford it after one of the biggest benefit cuts in Britain's history. Are they right to keep the triple lock on pensions? Or have we got to a stage now economically, given the sort of dire straits that this country is potentially in, to say, well, look, actually, it's a nice thing to have, but it's not something we can afford anymore?
Well, people should understand what the triple lock is. It's essentially every pensioner in the country gets either a 2.5% rise, or they get, if it's higher than that, the increase in the price index, consumer price index, or they get the increase in average earnings, whichever is the higher. So you'll always get as a pensioner 2.5%, but almost certainly more than that. Since it's been going since 2012, it's taken pensions up to again the highest they've been in relation to average earnings since the kind of mid 60s, and if it continues, it'll be very generous indeed. Just so listeners know, when the old age pension was launched, the state pension was launched at the same time as actually unemployment benefit, the two are the same. If you're on universal credit, you get broadly 100 quid a week. If you're a pensioner, you get 230 quid a week. It's got wildly out of kilter. So I think the scope for cutting benefits to pay for the triple lock is actually kind of impossible. My own recommendation is to go for what I call an average lock. So you average those three things I told you about earlier, and that would still keep pensioners kind of ahead of the game, and it would be affordable, and I think people would accept it as a matter of principle. I mean, I think the idea of giving a triple lock, kind of pauperizing already very poor benefit claimants and doing nothing whatsoever to relieve student loans. I mean, this is really Nigel Farmer and reform playing to their base. I get it politically, but I think it's kind of I think it's unfair and unreasonable, actually. I'm against the triple lock as it currently stands. I think the next Parliament, whoever gets elected, will have to make it an average lock.
And finally, let's talk about this mansion tax being brought in by the government. The official watchdog has predicted 45,000 more properties than first will now face annual surcharges of up to £7,500. In total, more than 165,000 homes could be hit by the mansion tax, which charges an extra levy on homes over £2 million to pay a surcharge of up to £7,500 each year. Is that fair? Because to a lot of average people sitting out there, they think, wow, if you sit in a £2 million home, you've done really well. You could definitely afford to pay an extra £7,500 a year, or maybe it's only going to be £2,500 if it's just £2 million, because it goes up incrementally.
Yeah.
And yet the reality of some people who happen to buy a house in London back when you could do that on a sort of more normal salary, and then they suddenly find out their modest little, two-bed cottage in Earl's Court is now worth over £2 million. They might own the asset, but they might not be particularly cash rich.
Well, I'm not sure that two-bedroom flats in Earl's Court
two-bedroom cottage I was talking about, bricks and mortar.
Yeah, okay. That's it. Okay. Again, on a privileged square in Earl's Court, maybe. Look, I mean, this is such a tricky and inflammatory subject, isn't it? I mean, there hasn't been a revaluation of residential property in Britain since 1991. That's 35 years. And that's in England, by the way. There has been one in Wales. And it's tremendously out of kilter. So that, for example, the council tax, it's a famous example, it's worth reminding people, the council tax on Buckingham Palace is kind of lower than that for a kind of three-bedroom semi in Scunthorpe. And it's got completely ridiculous because it's capped. Buckingham Palace would be in band G, and that's the top band, and that's that. So I mean, I'm of a view that we do need to kind of. I think if taxation is if council tax is still based on 1991 values in 20 years' time, you'll live in a failed state, that no politician of any party was prepared to have the chutzpah to kind of revalue our properties. This is rough and ready, but I don't think it's unfair, really, that people in properties that are now worth more than 2 million should have to pay 2,500 extra. I mean, you talk to estate agents and they say, look, if you've got that kind of money, if you're a buyer, £2,500 is water off a duck's back. You're right. It does begin to gear up when you get over 3.5 million. It's £7,500. But people who live in those kinds of properties can afford it. And actually, one of the reasons why, there's so many potholes, why kind of local services are such crap, is because the local authorities haven't got any money. So, I do get it. I wish actually that the government had actually gone for a revaluation of all properties and then made it fair for everybody. I mean, I do think that some properties in the north of England, the Midlands. There may be listeners up there. And I'm kind of in Oxford as I talk to you, but I mean, which is pretty residential values are pretty high here, but it is pretty unfair. I mean, you pay disproportionately more council tax if you live in the Midlands and the north than you do in the southeast. And I for the same house, and I think it's, the time has come to begin a revaluation here, and to the extent there's a step in that direction, I welcome it, even though, as you said in your question, there are some kind of irrational outcomes, but the most irrational outcome is Buckingham Palace pay less council tax than a detached house in the north of England. There you go.
Well, there you go indeed. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for giving up time over the Easter weekend to join us and walk us through some of those things. Interesting messages have just come in that I want to read. David Dorset says, 230 quid a week, I wish. And that's after 43 years of contributions. Always remember that. The state pension has been paid for in advance, hasn't it? Hi, Alex. The triple lock this year is 4.7%. Woo! This brought my state pension over the personal allowance, so I'm paying tax on it for the first time. My council tax has gone up 5%, heating oil 130%. I'm worse off. Meanwhile, the 9 million people on workless and in-work benefits got a 6% increase, tax-free, and are exempt from council tax. There are single people who have never worked on benefits, twice that of the state pension of people who have worked for 50 years. Your guest is 100% wrong in his comparison between pensions and welfare. Yeah, very interesting as well. Certainly our welfare bill is ridiculous. We've got to the stage now where we give out more in welfare than we actually garner from those people in work and paying tax, and that is not sustainable. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but after that we're going to round off the show with your messages and your calls. So whatever it is that you wish to talk about, this is your last opportunity. 03444991000 is the number to call. It's your normal network rate. You can also send me a quick WhatsApp on that message, or leave me a quick voice note. Probably don't do that because I don't know if we'll have time to edit it and get it turned round. 87222 is the number if you'd rather send a text message. If you're going to do that, write the word talk before you text, and I'll see you just after this.
Good morning to you. This is Tour the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Just breaking news in the last couple of moments. Extraordinary news. Not just that the police have arrived at the Sandringham estate where Prince Andrew, as was now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, is currently living since being thrown out of the Windsor estate. The police have arrested Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It's an extraordinary revelation. And certainly what's been contained in the Epstein files as released in the last few weeks. It's his 66th birthday today. What a birthday present that is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there. So I was enjoying a good old cough during that advert break, so if I sound a little bit more croaky as a result, that is why. Let's give my little voice a rest and instead speak to Chris, who's in Cambridge. Good afternoon, Chris.
Yeah, hello there, Alex. Happy Easter to you. I just want to say, it's sad to ring in. I mean, your first guest sort of mirrored exactly what I was feeling at the time. It's just so refreshing. Your beautiful introduction to the show of the Easter message and what it really means. You portrayed it beautifully, and that lovely gift that God has given us of Jesus Christ, and the fact of what He's done for us upon that cross, and He died for our sins upon the and was resurrected on the third day to the glory of the Father, and we know that He will return. And just to add to that, just that little bit, even if I may, just to remind people that that is the truth. The historicity of Jesus Christ is set in stone. Archaeology, so much things, just prove who He was, and we accept Him by faith. But obviously that faith, it's a gift. But the only thing is that people have to remember is they have to accept that gift. And that gift is just receiving the fact of what Jesus is and who Jesus was. And it was just such a beautiful message, Alex. It really was. And I really thank you for that.
Oh, that's really nice to hear. Thank you, Chris. I wanted to share something because it's such an important time. In fact, after the show, I'm off to meet my bestie, Belinda, because we like going and watching the Stage of the Cross every Easter at Trafalgar Square. So that's what we'll be doing. What are you up to this Easter?
I've just seen going to church on Sunday, going to see my granddaughter and daughters over the weekend. Just spend obviously time with them, and so it'd be a lovely time, and such obviously the most important time with us as Christians. It's just amazing, and I do pray that you will get better soon from that cold you have and that cough or whatever it is. Yeah.
Oh, it's just a little head cold. I've been through worse. In all honesty, if you're praying over that is probably a prayer wasted. Send it in a far more worthy direction. But thank you ever so much for your kind sentiments. That was Chris in Cambridge. Let's speak to John, who's in Stoke-on-Trent. Good afternoon, John.
Yeah, I just thought how ironic that Liz Truss has been belittled all this time. And what she wanted to do was drill, and there was a coal mine in Durham, and everything got squashed. And now Ed Miliband has got egg all over his face. They're going round to Liz Truss's way of thinking now.
Well, do you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Talking about coal, the idea that we might reopen the coal mines, I think, is for the birds. I can't see Ed Miliband remotely doing that because, of course, it was under his watch, I believe, or was it his predecessor? I think it was him, who closed the very last choking coal mine in the United Kingdom, and which is so important for the manufacture of steel, and we can see what's happened to steel as well, and the idea that we're going to start sort of actually using our, some might say, God-given resources to help boost the economy, boost manufacturing, productivity, prosperity, seems, well, a sort of hope in vain when it comes to this government.
Yeah, but we're still using coal, but it's coming from Poland and Australia and all other places. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Because you can do open cast coal in Durham, There's no need to have mines. It's just mad, isn't it?
Yeah, do you know, it's funny. My dad actually used to work down the mines in Durham back in the day as a youth. Coking coal, I meant, so you're not choking coal. You can tell I've got a cold. My mind's going other places because I'm there going, having to press my cough button every now and then. So I had the word choking in my mind. You know, I always think it's one of those things. Even if you're the most ardent, staunch believer in climate change, you've got to be able to, for want of a better word, oil the machine to enable the transition from fossil fuels into the brave new world of carbon-free energy production. And if you've got it, you may as well use it, because what doesn't make sense to me is when you know you've still got a reliance on fossil fuels, actually choosing instead to import these things from other countries at inflated prices when we could potentially benefit from those prices, as well as having geopolitical leverage, as well as being energy self-sufficient, which means protecting ourselves, keeping the lights on, not having to go cap in hand to ne'er-do-well regimes who use exactly these sorts of things to blackmail and hold hostage the rest of the world. This is what we are seeing right now with the Strait of Hormuz. Iran knows that if it blocks off that narrow passageway, then the provision of things such as oil and gas to countries that rely on it suddenly disappears, which puts a lot of pressure on the global community to stand up to Trump and say, don't you dare go after Iran anymore. The consequences, the price being paid by the rest of us is too high. And then what happens? Well, you've got a mad theocracy with a nuclear weapon. But to me, it's all an argument for why, even if we weren't using it, what we should never have done is prevented its extraction. And that is something that Mad Ed seems to do. But there you go. John, thank you ever so much for your call. We're awaiting the arrival of Mr. Ian Collins. Here he is. Come on, Ian. Chop, chop. I've been waiting.
Hola.
You're a minute late, son.
I've been here.
Plug your microphone in or shout louder. No one's going to be able to hear you.
Here.
I know you're here. I saw you sitting outside, diligently bent over your laptop, typing
It's
things
not a good
out.
look, is it? Yes, I was diligent.
Good. That's nice.
Why would I not be diligent?
Well,
It's
what
Easter,
have you been diligent about?
Well, we've been diligent about. There's quite a lot of things to talk about, of course. We will pick up on the kind of sense of lawlessness in this country. The bit
crazy.
that I never get is, you know, have you ever seen the film Network, where the guy shouts out, you know, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. It's a big line. And have you ever heard one of our politicians react to anything like that? To get really, you see Trump do it, whether you like Trump or not.
Oh no, only
you see Trump do it a lot.